I was on a small vacation over New Year's to see my two brothers and a couple good friends of mine at my hometown. To be perfectly upfront, I never liked my hometown. Moved away as soon as I was able. It was a real small, out-of-the-way town with no cities or even neighboring towns for miles and miles. Everything was outdated and run down, and the only ones living there were people who had been there all their lives. My brothers and friends were the only reason I ever came back to visit. Usually, I'd stay at one of my brother's places for the week, but this year, both of them now had girlfriends that lived with them, so I really didn't feel like being the third wheel. The only hotel in the town was a real small family hotel right off the gravel highway. I don't think it even had a name. It was just hotel. I arrived there pretty late. The parking lot was empty except for one old truck. When I walked inside, the lobby was dim, lit by a single lamp behind the counter. An older man, 60s maybe, scruffy beard and hair grown out unevenly, stood up from a chair when he saw me. It looked like I had startled him, or that he wasn't expecting me, but after a moment he said, "Need a room?" His voice was low and rough. He gave me a key and showed me to the room at the end of the hallway. Inside this hotel, it was very old. Not like it was falling apart, but old enough that it felt kind of dirty. The room was small too. Just a bed right in the middle with a TV in front of it. Figured it didn't matter, since I was only going to be here to sleep, and would be spending the days with my friends and family. I left everything packed and took a quick shower, then passed out on the bed. However, I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. to a soft knocking. Not at my door, at the far end of the hallway. I laid there listening to it through the thin walls. Spaced out, quiet, slow knocks. Then silence. Then a few more. It kind of sounded like an old wooden door, opening and closing. The knocks being the low thuds against the door frame. I didn't know what was going on out there, but this wasn't exactly a 5-star place, so I didn't bother caring. I fell back asleep after a while. When I got up in the morning, I went to grab coffee from the lobby before heading out, but the lobby was empty, not a coffee bar or anything. Even the front desk was empty, no sign of the old man or anyone else working there. Felt a little strange, but I shrugged it off and left to go spend the day with my brothers. I was out for a long time. I think it wasn't until 9-ish that I got back to the hotel. Once again, just that one truck was in the parking lot. When I walked in, the lobby lights were off now, and the whole place felt colder. Still no signs of the old man. I walked down the hallway and into my room, locking the door and changing into more comfortable clothes for the night. And that's when I heard it again. Those strange thud or knocking sounds. It was only a couple before it stopped and was quiet again, but this time it sounded like it was right outside of my room. I went over and cracked the door open just enough to peer into the hallway and see what was going on. Only had a second to notice the door right next to mine was slightly open now, before the man's voice called to me from down the hallway. It made me jump. He called out, asking me to come down to the lobby, and before I could respond, he walked back out of view of the hallway. He didn't say why or anything. It was super weird, but I felt like I had to go down there and see what he wanted. Maybe there was a problem with my room or something. I walked down the hallway. The place was still quiet. I knew I had to be the only one staying in this hotel right now. When I got to the end, he wasn't there. The lobby was still dark, and I didn't even hear him walking around anywhere. I got a really bad feeling standing there in the lobby. I didn't like knowing that I was alone in there, even if he likely didn't have any bad intentions. After a few seconds, I decided to just hurry back to my room. I stayed up a bit later that night, but never heard any signs of the man being inside the hotel. It's like he just left after I saw him at the end of the hallway. In the morning, I went and saw my friends and mentioned the strangeness of the hotel I was staying at. All of them were confused. They seemed to all agree that they had heard something about that hotel closing down a year or two ago. None of them were sure though, and said if I was staying there, then surely they were wrong. I spent the whole day with them, heading back late in the night. As I drove there, I couldn't help but think about the possibility that the place was actually vacant or shut down. But it just couldn't be. The lights and water in my room worked, and the old guy working there wouldn't be there to give me a room if it wasn't open. I pulled in to the same site as the previous 2 nights, an empty parking lot with just the one truck. I walked inside a little more cautiously this time. Still, the lights were mostly off, and I heard nothing at all. I started walking down to my room, and when I got up to the door, I froze. It was cracked open. I creaked the door open further. The room was dark, and honestly, I was terrified to even enter. I saw my suitcase, which was still mostly packed, and decided to quickly run in and grab it. Everything else I had left in there was worth leaving, like a toothbrush and random stuff like that I didn't care about. Definitely not enough to risk staying there any longer. I started to hurry out of there. Something in my gut told me I needed to get out of there immediately. I got down to the end of the hallway and into the dark lobby when I happened to look back at where I came from. I don't know if I'd unconsciously heard something or if I just had a feeling to, but when I looked back, I felt my whole body go numb. I saw the old man peering out from the doorway to my room, staring down at me. I ran to my car and drove to one of my brother's places. He urged me to call the police, just to get the whole story straight. Even if it was just a worker snooping around my hotel room, it was worth reporting. But what we found was a lot worse. My friends were right. That place was vacant. Not necessarily abandoned though. It was still connected to the power grid and everything, but the owners of the land shut it down and moved away, and sort of just left it there. And when the cops searched the place, they found no signs that the old man was there. Even that old truck that was there on all 3 days I was there was gone now. And actually, it seemed like the police didn't even believe me. Like they thought I was a crazy person that was using the abandoned hotel as a free place to stay, and just hallucinated the guy. They didn't say that outright, but I could just tell by the way they were talking to me. It made me feel even worse about that whole town. I stayed at my brother's place for the next few days, then gladly left town and headed back home. Absolutely the strangest, most confusing, and legitimately horrifying experience I've ever had. Thinking back on it is almost worse, knowing what I was in the middle of, and how close I probably was to never being seen again, had I not realized something was wrong and left in a hurry. I took a short vacation last Christmas to see my family over the holidays. Plan was to meet some of my family at our cabin a few hours south of the city, right in between where me and the rest of my family lived. It was just a quiet mountain cabin my parents have had for years, that we often met up at for vacations or getaways. A little wooden home with a fireplace and a view of the woods. It was always peaceful, and really that was all I wanted. This wasn't going to be some big Christmas get-together either. My family was small, just me, my parents, and my sister. But since I was driving alone, I decided to plan for 5 days. 4 to spend with my family, and 1 that I could spend there alone. I arrived 3 days before Christmas, late in the afternoon. The sky was already darkening when I parked, and the woods behind the cabin were already covered in a haze from the sun setting. I only had a couple hours before getting to bed, so I just walked through the cabin, unpacked, and took a nice long shower, then slept through the night. I think it had been over a year since the last time any of us from the family had been to the cabin, but because I had barely been there before by myself, there was no way to know if anything was really wrong with it. I figured I'd just let my parents deal with that when they got here, though. And from a quick glance, nothing seemed to be off about the place. It was as nice and peaceful as I'd hoped. And the following day was my one and only full day to spend alone at the cabin, so I wanted to make it worthwhile. I got up early, made a hot cup of coffee, and took it with me on a walk around the woods. There was a rugged footpath from all the walks we'd taken over the years. It was maybe a 2-mile loop just through the trees and back to the cabin. That morning, it was fairly cold outside, and there was a thin layer of snow on the ground that had fallen overnight. The woods were very quiet. Really, all I heard was wind flowing through the trees. But I only made it half a mile in before seeing some strange scuffs in the snow right on the trail. Thought it might have been a deer or other animal, but further down, there were more clear prints, showing they were shoe prints. Very distinct, too, like they'd been made not long ago. I looked around. Nobody should have been out in these woods, especially this close onto our property. The prints seemed to follow the trail for a while, and as I continued along it, I just started getting uneasy about it, and decided to turn back. I was sure it was nothing, just a hunter walking around, or maybe someone else had a cabin near there, but I wanted to be safe and just head back. I definitely didn't want to run into anyone out there in the middle of nowhere. That was pretty much all that was on my mind the whole walk back, trying to figure out why someone was out there. Finally seeing the cabin, I walked up to the front door and almost choked on my coffee. There were shoe prints going right up to the door. It came from the other way, where the trail ended and came back around. Obviously, they weren't there before, so that means whoever was out here had been right outside the cabin just minutes ago. I frantically looked around, feeling like someone was watching me. But all I saw was an empty, snowy forest all around me. After a few seconds, the tension got too much for me to handle, and I quickly got inside and locked the door. My heart was racing. The chances of this happening was nearly zero, and on the one day that I was here alone, was even less likely. It felt like this couldn't possibly be a coincidence. And the thing is, when I left the cabin to go for a short walk, I didn't lock it. Because why the hell would I need to, for just going on a quick walk on my own property out in the middle of an isolated forest? I felt extremely uncomfortable, but I really hoped I was just overreacting. Like whoever that was just saw the trail led to a cabin, and checked through the windows if it was abandoned or something, then just left when they saw I wasn't. It was still creepy as hell though. I called my parents to let them know about what was going on, just in case. They said that maybe I should spend the night at a hotel and wait for them to get there tomorrow, just so I wasn't alone. My mom also seemed more nervous about it than I was, which is saying a lot. But I decided to stay. I was still going to be cautious, not opening the doors anymore and just staying inside for the rest of the day. Pretty bad decision looking back on it. The day dragged on. I wanted this to be a peaceful, relaxing day alone, but knowing that I might not be alone out there made it the complete opposite of relaxing. I was more paranoid than anything. I sat in the living room by the fireplace for most of the day, drinking coffee to keep me awake. Even though I was tired, I didn't want to sleep. Closing my eyes didn't feel safe, like something could happen if I didn't stay alert. Slowly, the day started coming to an end and the sun started getting lower, and eventually it was dark out again. An eerie calmness fell over the woods around the cabin. It was just the crackling fireplace lighting up the small room I was in. Even after all those hours, I was still thinking about those footprints coming up to the cabin. And as I got more and more tired, knowing I needed to sleep at some point, I was desperate for a way to somehow know if I was safe, like a sign that they were really gone. And somehow it wasn't until that moment that I thought about checking to see where the footprints led after reaching the cabin, like if they turned around and went back toward the trail, or just off into the woods, which would have been incredibly creepy. I got up and creaked open the front door. It was pitch black and silent outside. The woods out front were too ominous to look at without getting chills. I looked down at the still frozen shoe prints in the snow. Even just seeing them again gave me a really bad gut feeling. I looked for the shoe prints leading away, and kept looking, and slowly I could feel my face getting pale as I couldn't find any shoe prints leading away from the cabin. They went right up to the door, then just disappeared at the doorway. And that's when it hit me. Me leaving the cabin unlocked, and the footprints not leaving. I slowly turned around, looking into the dark, flickering orange glow inside the cabin from the fireplace. Someone was in here with me. Someone had been in there with me all day. Almost right on cue, I heard a slight creak down the hall. I leaned my body forward, enough to look down the hall toward the bedrooms. My bedroom door was open, and a man was in the middle of the hall, slowly creeping toward the living room I was in. As soon as he saw me, he froze for a moment, before bolting down the hallway at me. I took my keys off the wall and sprinted to my car, getting in and leaving immediately. By the time I felt far enough to look in the mirror, the cabin wasn't even lit up by my back headlights anymore. It was just a void of black behind me. I got into the nearest town and had police take my report and check out the cabin. Of course, the man wasn't there when the officers looked. They did find some scuffs on the floor in the bedroom though, inside the small stand-in closet. So they think he was hiding in there all day, waiting for me to go to bed and fall asleep. But what really makes it that much creepier is that's all we know. No idea who he was or what he wanted to do to me. I mean, what if it was someone I knew, that knew I'd be going to that cabin alone for a day? The coincidence of it all seems like a lot, but I really hope that's all it is, and that I'll never have to encounter that man again. I was somewhere in northern Oregon when it happened. I don't remember the exact highway. It wasn't one of the main ones, just one of those empty back roads surrounded by miles of dense forest. I'd been driving for hours, with the music low and the windows cracked to keep myself awake. This was supposed to be a pretty standard road trip, I guess, just seeing a few places, driving around, and clearing my head from all the noise. Nothing too exciting. I'd been paying relatively close attention to my gas gauge, checking every so often, and trying to fill it up when it was around a fourth of a tank. But I guess this time I pushed it too far. When the warning light came on, I figured I still had plenty of miles left to make it to the next gas station. I even checked my phone for the next station. Definitely was slightly nervous though, seeing as there were no other closer options, even if I were to do a U-turn. Anyway, I kept driving, glancing down at my phone a while later and seeing it was at 35 minutes. Then I checked again maybe a few minutes later, seeing it still said 35 minutes. I remember staring at that number, wondering if it was even accurate anymore. Surely it was just an error or something. I checked another couple minutes later, and that's when I fully realized that the GPS wasn't updating at all. It was stuck at the 35-minute mark, and the little car icon wasn't moving either. I started messing with my phone, trying to reset the directions and clicking every button. But before I could get it working, my car sputtered. I felt my stomach drop. I hoped it was just a quick one-time thing from being low on fuel and not empty. Only got 30 seconds further before it sputtered again, and then again, and completely cut out. Wouldn't turn back on even in the slightest. I coasted to the shoulder of the road and sat there in silence for a minute, unable to believe the situation I knew I was in. I looked around at the place I'd ended up basically trapped at. The forest on either side of me was dark and lifeless. No lights at all, and a dense fog covering the top of the trees. It gave me chills as I sat there looking at it. I felt eerily alone. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but it took me about 10 seconds to see why my GPS had gotten stuck, and now why my calls wouldn't go through. I had no service, like zero service whatsoever. I put my head in my hands for a second, realizing how screwed I was, then got out of my car. I figured if my phone GPS had been frozen at 35 minutes for a while, I could have been just 10 to 15 minutes from the gas station. I mean, I had no way to know how long it was frozen for. If I was lucky, I could walk to the gas station and make it in half an hour or something. What other choice did I have anyway? I grabbed a small flashlight from the glove compartment, then manually locked the car with my key, and started walking down the road. It was empty and quiet, but not in the peaceful way. In the I can barely see anything through the fog and pitch darkness kind of way. The forest on either side of me was so unnervingly quiet and dark. Every time I glanced over, my eyes would be looking all around at the shadows that filled the areas between the trees, making every small thing look like something I knew it wasn't. It was just my imagination filling in the darkness with shapes that weren't there. So I tried to not even look. I kept my eyes forward, looking at the endless road ahead. My flashlight was nice to have, but it barely made it 10 feet in front of me with all the fog on the road. But about 5 minutes in, I heard something. It was a few cracks of branches, definitely not wind, or just trees swaying. It was something snapping a couple of branches, either by stepping on them or I don't know. I stopped walking. The forest went dead silent. I pointed my flashlight out there and stared into the darkness. The longer I looked though, the more uneasy I got, seeing those shapes again and knowing something could be out there looking back at me. Like if I continued to stare for too long, something would happen. So I looked away and kept walking, a little more rushed though, at least to get away from that area. A few minutes later, I noticed something on the right side of the road up ahead. At first, all I could see was a large shape laying near the trees. Thought it might have just been a fallen tree or something. But as I got closer and could get my flashlight to light it up a bit, I realized it was a car. An old beat-up sedan, halfway lodged into the forest, way past the shoulder of the road. But strangely, it didn't really look like it had crashed there. Looked more like whoever it was had driven it slowly down to the edge of the tree line, and then just left it there. The driver's side door was open slightly, and the car looked like it'd been there for a while, weeks or months even. And it was far enough off the road that unless you were walking along the secluded stretch like I was, then there was no way any cars passing by would notice it. Seeing that car lit up in my flashlight made me really disturbed. The thought that someone else had been here, maybe also run out of gas, or broken down or whatever. And whatever happened afterward clearly wasn't good if the car was still abandoned here. I didn't call out or shine my flashlight into the trees. I don't know why, but again I had this overwhelming feeling that if I looked for too long, something terrible would happen. And just when I thought that, and realized I needed to keep moving, there was another sound from the woods. A rustle in the bushes, near one of the trees behind the car. And then another. I turned instinctively toward the noise, and for a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me again. But no. I saw something. Not clearly, not faces or details. Just figures moving between the trees. More than one. A group of people running through the forest just outside of view. My whole body went cold. I started speed walking down the road. Not running. I almost had this instinctual thought that I didn't want to look like prey and show I was panicked by sprinting. But I walked faster than normal. I tried to act like I didn't hear the footsteps that started to match my pace in the forest. Multiple sets, crunching through the forest, following me along the tree line. I was genuinely too afraid to shine my light over there, or even look, scared of what I'd see. And somehow, through all of that going on, I never even heard or noticed a truck driving up behind me. Wasn't until the pickup truck stopped right next to me and a man yelled through the roll-down window that I got startled and realized he was even there. It was some regular-looking, dusty pickup truck, and the man looked maybe 50, with gray in his beard. He looked tired, but not necessarily threatening. "You stranded. What are you doing walking around out here? You're a long way from anything." I was so shaken, I just answered truthfully, saying my car ran out of gas and that I hoped I could walk to the nearest gas station. The man almost let out a short smirk, like I was crazy. "Hop in. I'll take you to the station. Think you're a lot further than you think you are." During this whole conversation, every sound and movement in the forest had stopped, and it was dead silent again. It was like everything paused for those 30 seconds. I hesitated, but decided to get in. Hitchhiking out there in the middle of nowhere was not something I ever thought I'd do, but the alternative of staying alone, the old man really was just trying to help, and he seemed just as cautious as I was about the whole hitchhiking thing. He said he never offered rides, but that he lived on a farm an hour north and takes this road a lot, and had never seen someone like me wandering at night like that, and knew something could be really wrong. I didn't mention what I'd seen or heard out in the forest, not wanting to sound like an insane person. The drive to the gas station took way longer than I thought, nearly 25 minutes. Would have taken me hours to walk there, if I even made it past that forest. And when we got to the gas station, the man gave me a pat on the shoulder and wished me luck. That was it. No weirdness, no strange comments, just a guy helping someone out. I headed in and bought a gas tank, then took the clerk's advice to call the police to help me out, now that I had service. He said the sheriff's office around here was kind, and would give me a lift back to my car and make sure everything was okay. Thank God I did, because getting dropped back off at my car at night alone would have been awful. And when the cop drove me there, we found my car, except it had been moved. It was off the shoulder and on the edge of the forest, almost exactly like the other car I'd found out there. Someone, or that group, had pushed my car down there, like they didn't want anyone else to see it. That's when I told the officer everything. Anyway, that whole night became a mess. But to sum it up, the police wrote a report and did a bit of searching, but nothing came of it. No suspects, no nearby houses, and no one else had seen or heard anything. Even the other car they found had no plates on it or identifying information. There's really no saying what those people out in the forest were there for, or what they would have done if that pickup truck hadn't shown up exactly when it did.
This happened on Christmas Day 2 years ago, and so every December since then, it plays in my head like a movie I never asked to be in. I was 17 that year, living with my parents in a nice little subdivision Oregon. That Christmas was picture perfect. Fresh snow, blue sky in the morning, and that soft pink glow as the sun went down. Inside though, it was chaos. My family goes huge for Christmas. I'm talking about cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Everybody stuffed into our house like clowns in a car. Kids running around with frosting on their faces. My grandma yelling at my uncle about putting too much salt in the gravy. And random Christmas movies playing in the background with the volume too low to actually hear. I'm the emo antisocial one in the family, so most of the day I just floated around the edges. I helped put food out, faked laugh at small talk, and hid in the kitchen whenever I could. That's where I was when I first saw him. My cousin Jenna walked in with a guy nobody had ever seen before. She was glowing in a way that girls get when they bring a new boyfriend around. He was older, mid-30s easily. Too old for her in my opinion. He had this short beard, slicked hair, and a Christmas sweater that would have looked normal on anyone else but looked like a costume on him. The first thing I noticed was his eyes. He didn't scan the room like a normal person does. He locked onto me. I was just standing there by the counter, slicing store-bought pumpkin pie, and felt his gaze hit me like a spotlight. It wasn't a curious look. It wasn't even a, "Oh, who's that?" It felt like I was being sized up. I looked away, busying myself with my plate. "This is Dave," Jenna said, dragging him over to my mom. "We've been dating for a couple of months." My mom did her usual thing. Hug, smile, "Nice to meet you. Welcome to the madhouse." Everybody laughed. He laughed too, but it sounded off, like he'd practiced it. I kept my head down, but every time I glanced up, he was watching me. Later, when everybody was in the living room, opening gifts, I sat on the floor by the far wall, half behind the tree, scrolling through my phone with my headphones on, but no music playing. I saw him move through the room, talking to different people, laughing and shaking hands. But he circled back to me, over and over. He'd stand just close enough that I knew he was there. Then he'd lean down, pretend to be interested in something near me, and start a conversation. "So, you're Jenna's cousin?" he asked at one point, kneeling next to me like we were buddies. I could smell cheap cologne and something sour underneath it. "Yeah," I said. "You look different from the rest of them," he said, eyes drifting over my clothes, my hair and my face. "In a good way. I like your style." Yup, I knew he was a creep all along. This is why I don't care when people judge me for always trusting my gut. I didn't answer. I moved to sit with my younger cousins instead, pretending to help them open toys, but he followed. Every time I relocated, to the kitchen, to the hallway, to the dining room, he'd appear a few minutes later. He kept trying to joke with me, calling me mysterious and other weird corny things, asking me if I had a boyfriend, what kind of music I liked, and if I ever snuck out at night. Stuff that might sound normal if somebody your own age said it, but straight up wrong coming from a guy pushing 40. The final straw was when everybody was grabbing dessert and I was alone in the hallway for a second, taking tape off my fingers from wrapping paper. He stepped in front of me, blocking the way, and smiled. "You know, you're going to be trouble when you're older," he said, eyes never leaving my face. "If you're not already." My stomach flipped. My mind instantly went to WTF. "I'm already older," I said, "and I'm not interested." He laughed quietly and leaned a little closer. "I didn't say you had to be interested to have fun." That's when I snapped out of my usual just ignore people mode. "If you don't back off," I said, looking him right in the eyes, "I'm telling my parents that you're creeping on me." For a second, his smile dropped, just gone. His eyes changed, like he was angry I'd said it out loud. Then he smirked and stepped back. "Relax," he said. "I'm just joking around, don't be so serious." After that, he mostly left me alone. He still stared sometimes, but he didn't corner me again. I told myself not to make it a bigger deal than it had to be. My cousin looked happy, the adults were laughing, and kids were running around showing off their new toys. I decided not to tell my parents. It was late, everybody was full and tired, and I didn't want to start some big family fight on Christmas. I brushed it off the way I always do. People started leaving around 9. There were hugs and drive safe and see you next year at the door. I watched from the stairs as Jenna and Dave left. He glanced up once, met my eyes, and gave me a little 2-finger wave, but I pretended not to see it. By 10:30, the house was quiet. My parents were cleaning up the kitchen, and I went upstairs to my room. Snow was still falling outside, thick and slow, and I was just thankful it was all over. My window faced the street, and the view honestly looked like something from a movie. I put on my headphones and put on some 3 Days Grace and flopped on my bed with a book I probably wasn't actually going to read. I turned the volume up, letting the music drown out the last thoughts and drama of family noise I had going through my head. That's why I wasn't sure at first if I actually heard it. A small tap on the glass behind my head. I paused the song, lay there listening. My heart picked up a little, but I told myself it was probably just a tree branch or something shifting in the wind. I turned the music back on. Maybe 5 minutes later, I heard it again. It was slightly louder, though. I sat up this time. My bed is pushed right up against the window, so the glass is basically the headboard. I turned around and looked at the window. It was fogged over from the difference between the warm air inside and the freezing air outside. Couldn't see anything except the fuzzy glow of one of the nearby streetlights. Probably nothing, I said to myself, even though I knew houses don't knock 3 times in a row. I'll admit I was freaked out, deep down, but I just wanted so badly to be overreacting that I eventually believed it. I slid off the bed and stood up, leaning closer. I wiped a circle in the condensation with the sleeve of my hoodie. First, all I could see was the street covered in snow. The sidewalks, the rows of houses across from ours, lights off except a few porch lights. Then I saw him. A figure standing on the sidewalk, down the street a little bit. He had a dark jacket on, jeans, and a posture slouched slightly, like he'd been standing there for a while. He was facing my house. His head was angled upward toward my window. Even from that distance, even in the dark, I recognized the outline. Dave. I dropped my sleeve from the glass like it was hot and stumbled backward, heart pounding so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. I grabbed the blinds and yanked them shut, then shut off my lamp so the room went dark. I stood there for a minute, pressed against the wall, listening. I considered going downstairs and telling my parents right then, but some stubborn part of me said, what if you're overreacting? What if it's not even him? The idea of explaining, hey, that guy who creeped me out earlier is standing on our street, felt insane. So I watched. For the next 20 or 30 minutes, I'd sneak to the edge of the blinds, lift one slat and peek out. Most times I saw nothing but swirling snow. Sometimes I thought I saw movement, but it was probably just flakes catching the light. Eventually, the sidewalk looked empty. The panic dulled the nervous energy. I told myself he'd left, that it really was just my imagination or some random neighbor walking their dog earlier. Who knows? I went back to my bed, turned on my lamp again, and tried to actually read my book. Headphones sat around my neck, music off this time. I think it was close to midnight when it happened. A sudden violent bang against the window right above my head. The glass rattled, and the sound was so loud and so close that I screamed without even meaning to. It wasn't a tap this time, it was both hands slamming into the glass. Hey, a muffled voice called through the window, way too close. Open up. I scrambled off the bed, my legs almost giving out, and bolted for the door. I didn't even stop to look. I didn't want to see his face that close on the other side of the glass. My whole body was shaking as I yanked my bedroom door open and sprinted down the hall. I ran out of my room and started yelling, Dad. My voice cracking. Somebody's at my window. My dad came out of his room at the same time my mom did, both of them half asleep and confused. The look on my face must have told them that this wasn't a joke. My dad didn't ask more than, where? And I just pointed toward my room. Stay with your mom, he said, already heading down the stairs. I watched from the top as he went to the gun safe in the hallway closet, punched in the code with shaking fingers, and grabbed his handgun and a flashlight. He didn't even bother with the coat, just his pajama pants and a t-shirt. He went out the back door instead of the front, probably hoping to catch whoever it was off guard. My mom had her phone out, hands trembling as she dialed 911. I stood by the upstairs window in the hallway, peeking through the blinds that looked out over the backyard. The world outside was white and dark and silent. Then my dad's flashlight beam cut across the yard. It landed on a figure standing a few feet from my bedroom window. Dave. He was just standing there. No hat, no gloves, breath fogging in the air. When the light hit him, he squinted and lifted a hand like the brightness annoyed him more than being caught did. What the hell are you doing here? My dad shouted. Even through the glass, I heard Dave's answer. I'm sorry, man, he said, like he'd misplaced a phone, not stalked a teenage girl. I don't know, I needed to talk to her. My dad moved closer, gun pointed down but ready. Talk to my daughter, at midnight, at her bedroom window. Dave laughed softly, that same fake laugh from earlier in the day. She's special, I love her, and I want to marry her. You can sign for it, right? Parent consent, that's all it takes. My mom gasped beside me, hand flying to her mouth. My dad snapped. Get on the ground. You absolute psycho, he yelled. Now. Dave shook his head like my dad was being unreasonable. You don't understand. She gets it. My dad lunged. The flashlight beam jerked wildly as he tackled Dave into the snow. I lost sight of them for a second and just heard grunts and the crunch of boots and his knees digging into the frozen ground. Then the light settled and I could see my dad on top of him, pinning his arms behind his back with his knee. Call the cops, he shouted, though my mom already was. The next few minutes felt like an hour. My dad stayed on him, not letting him move, barking at him to shut up every time he tried to talk. I caught pieces of what Dave said, stuff about meant to be and she's different and Christmas miracle. It made my skin crawl. When the police finally pulled up, lights flashing blue and red across the snow, my legs almost gave out from relief. 2 officers ran into the yard, shouting commands. My dad got off him slowly, hands raised, explaining who he was. They cuffed Dave, patted him down, and pulled stuff from his pockets. I watched from the window as they set things on the hood of the patrol car. Little plastic baggies, condoms, more than one knife, a stack of IDs with different names and pictures. One of the officers noticed me staring from the window and gave me a quick serious nod, the kind of nod that said, you did the right thing. Dave was trespassed from our property and taken away that night. We gave statements until almost 3 in the morning. I heard bits and pieces later. Meth, fake IDs, warrants, but I never found out the full story of what happened to him in court. What I do know is this. If he waited until my parents went to sleep, if I'd opened the window even an inch, if I'd kept second-guessing myself instead of screaming and running for my dad, this might be a completely different story. And yes, for those wondering, my cousin broke up with him immediately and cut off all contact. This happened on Christmas, years ago, and it ruined Secret Santa for me forever. I was 24 at the time, working at a mid-sized office in the city. Nothing special at all. Cubicles, those fluorescent lights, and break room coffee that always tasted mid. The only thing people actually seemed excited about was the annual Secret Santa. I'd only been there about a year, so I signed up mostly because I didn't want to be the weird one who didn't participate. We all pulled names out of a bowl. I got some guy from accounting I barely knew. I figured I'd grab him a mug and some candy and call it a day. A few days later, the gifts started showing up. My first Secret Santa gift was normal. I came in one morning and found a little red bag on my desk. Inside was a Starbucks gift card and some chocolates. The tag said, "For the one who always looks tired. Merry Christmas." Kind of rude, kind of funny. Everybody joked about their gifts. People were posting pictures of them in our group chat. It felt harmless. Around that same week, we got a new hire. He introduced himself as Evan. Tall, mid-30s, and kind of plain. He wore a blue button-up, black slacks, and one of those generic office ID badges on a lanyard. My manager walked him over to the row of cubicles near mine, and the guy said he'd be helping out on the client side for the end-of-the-year rush. He seemed friendly enough. Asked the usual questions. How long had I been there? Did I like it? Where was the bathroom, and where was the good coffee? But there was something about him I didn't like. He watched people more than he talked to them. He always seemed to be listening, just from out of view. I told myself I was being paranoid, though. A few days later, I stayed late to finish some reports. It was dark when I finally shut down my computer, and most of the office was empty. I rode the elevator down to the parking garage. My car was parked in one of the corners. As I walked toward it, I noticed something on the windshield. A small, neatly wrapped present. My stomach dropped a little. I looked around first. Just rows of parked cars and the exit ramp. I picked up the box. The tag had my name on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a pair of fuzzy gloves and a note. "You shouldn't walk to your car alone so late. Someone has to look out for you. Signed, your Secret Santa." My chest tightened. Secret Santa was supposed to happen during office hours, on desks, in the break room, not in a mostly empty garage where I walked alone. The next day, I mentioned it to a couple of coworkers. They laughed it off. One said, "Wow, your Secret Santa's got game," and another said, "At least yours pays attention." I laughed along, but it didn't feel funny. The second time it happened, it wasn't cute at all. A week before Christmas, I stayed late again. I told myself I wouldn't, but end-of-year deadlines didn't care how creeped out I was. The garage was even emptier this time. Only a few scattered cars, and the lights seemed dimmer than usual. When I got to my car, there was nothing on the windshield. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, unlocked the door, and got in. When I sat down, I saw it. A small red box sitting on the passenger seat. I always lock my car. Always. I looked around quickly, heart racing, then locked the doors again from the inside, even though that wasn't going to fix anything. My hands were shaking as I opened the box. There was no gift inside this time. Just a note folded in half. "You really need to be more careful. It was too easy to get in here." I drove home with my heart thumping, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The next morning, I went straight to HR. I told them about the weird gifts I've been getting, and the note. I didn't say stalker, but I didn't have to. The HR lady's face tightened as she listened. She said she'd talk to security and review the cameras. On my way out of her office, I passed Evan in the hallway. He smiled at me. "Rough morning?" he asked casually. "Yeah," I muttered. "You got home safe last night, right?" he asked. I stopped. "What?" He shrugged. "You mentioned you were staying late. Roads were icy. Just asking." I hadn't told him anything about staying late. Something about that clicked in my brain. I walked straight into my manager's office instead of my desk. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "That new guy, Evan, how long is he contracting for?" My manager gave me a blank look. "Who?" "The guy you introduced to our row last week. Tall, dark hair, badge, sits by the front window." She frowned, thinking, "We don't have any new hires on your side. Not this month." I laughed nervously. "No, I mean the guy you showed around. He said that he was here to help with client stuff." "I've been out of the office for 3 days for meetings," she said. "I haven't shown anybody around." That's when my stomach really dropped. I went back to HR. They checked the visitor log. Nobody named Evan. The badge he wore should have had a number. There's no record of it. Security said they'd pull footage from the garage and entrances. For the rest of the day, I kept catching glimpses of him. In the hallway, in the break room, near the elevators. Always just passing by. Always watching. By the time I left, I was shaking. I got off the elevator in the garage and stood there for a second, listening. My car sat where it always did, slightly crooked between the lines. This time, there was a bigger box on the hood. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I unlocked my car from a distance, grabbed the box with my shirt, tossed it into the passenger side, got in, and sped out of there. I didn't open it until it was in my apartment with the door locked, the chain on and every light on. Inside was a USB drive and a small folded note. My hand shook as I opened the note. Open this. Merry Christmas. I plugged the USB into my laptop. There were multiple video files. I clicked the first one. It was grainy security style footage of me walking through the garage. Different nights, different outfits. Sometimes I was on my phone, sometimes digging through my bag, and sometimes looking around nervously. The camera wasn't from an overhead security cam. It was at a ground level, hidden behind concrete, peeking around pillars, and always a little too close. In one video, I walked right past the camera. For a split second, my face filled the frame. I flinched while watching it. The last video literally made my skin crawl. It was filmed from behind a car across from mine, angled so you could see both my car and the entrance to the garage elevator. The timestamp in the corner was from tonight, like 10 minutes earlier. The video showed my car sitting alone. Then in the distance, the elevator doors opened and I stepped out. I could see myself looking around, pulling my coat tighter and hesitating. The camera stayed low, unmoving, like whoever was recording was crouched behind something, waiting. At the end of the clip, you could hear breathing close to the mic, then a whisper. You never say goodnight when you leave. I ripped the USB out so fast my laptop chimed in error. My heart was hammering. For a second, I just stood there in my living room, shaking, feeling like I was being watched, even though my blinds were closed. I was reaching for my phone to call 911 when somebody knocked on my front door. Not like a normal knock. It was super hard, uneven pounding. 3 hits. Pause. 2 hits. Another hit. Like whoever it was couldn't stand still. Time stood still. The knocking came again. Hello, a man's voice called. Hey, it's me, from work. I need help. I didn't move, didn't answer. He kept talking through the door. I got jumped, he said, sounding breathless. They stole my car. My phone's gone. I didn't know where else to go. Please, I know you live near the office. I followed you once we left. Please, just let me use your phone. My stomach twisted. I looked through the people. It was him. Evan stood on my porch, shoulders hunched, one hand on the doorframe. There was blood on his forehead and running down his cheek, or at least it looked like blood. His shirt was ripped. He kept glancing over his shoulder like something might be chasing him. Come on, he said, voice cracking. Please, I'm freezing out here. Every instinct in me screamed to keep the door locked. I backed away from it. I'm calling the police, I said, trying to sound steady. They can help you. His tone changed in an instant. You don't need to do that, he said. The desperation dropped out of his voice. Just let me in. I know you're alone. I've watched you come home. My skin went cold. He hit the door with the side of his fist. Open the door. I ran to grab my phone, but I'd barely turned my back when it happened. He started kicking as hard as he could and ran into it with his shoulder. The door finally burst inward. I stumbled and dropped my phone as he shoved his way inside, slamming the door behind him with his heel. He was breathing hard, eyes wide, but there was no fear in them. Just this bright, excited look. See, he said. Now we don't have to shout through the door. I tried to run for the kitchen, but he was faster. He grabbed the back of my shirt and yanked me toward the living room. I scratched at his hands, kicked backward, anything. He dragged me a few feet before I twisted free and spun toward him. That's when he grabbed a picture frame off the TV stand. It was a family photo from a few years ago in a solid wood frame. He swung it like a club, catching me on the side of the head. White flashed in my vision. I hit the floor, ears ringing, and everything spinning. The frame shattered beside my face, glass scattering under my cheek. I felt his weight drop on me a second later, fingers clawing at my arms, trying to pin them above my head. You weren't supposed to run, he hissed. I was trying to be nice. I thrashed under him, half dizzy, grabbing at anything I could reach. My hand landed on a shard of broken glass, and I squeezed it without thinking, slicing it through my palm. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing until I dropped it. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled my knees up as hard as I could and kicked straight between his legs. Perfect nutshot. He made a sound that I'll never forget. His grip loosened instantly. He toppled sideways, clutching himself. I scrambled out from under him, slipped on the glass, and sprinted for the door. My vision was still tilted, my head throbbing, but adrenaline dragged me forward. I didn't stop to grab my phone. I didn't put on shoes. I yanked the broken door open and ran out into the cold. The air outside hit me like ice. I bolted across my small front yard and straight to my neighbor's house, pounding on their door like my life depended on it. They opened it after what felt like an eternity, but was probably 10 seconds. I practically fell inside. My neighbor's eyes went huge when she saw the blood on my face and hands. "Call 911, I gasped. "Please." He broke in. "He's in my house." Her husband locked the door and peered through the window while she dialed. He watched my house from across the street. By the time the police got there, he was gone. They cleared my place room by room. The front door was busted. The picture frame was smashed and there was a bunch of blood on the floor. The USB was still on the coffee table and my laptop was open. He left the same way he came in and vanished into the night, but they never found him. The company tightened security after that. New badges, new cameras, and no more Secret Santa for a while. HR said they think he'd been getting in by following employees to the lobby and using a cloned access card. I took a couple of weeks off, then eventually quit. I couldn't walk through that parking garage again without feeling like somebody was waiting behind every pillar. This year, people keep asking me if I miss doing Secret Santa at work. I just smile and say I'm over that kind of thing. What I don't say is that every time I see a little wrapped box or walk through a garage alone, or hear a knock at my door after dark, I remember his voice in that video whispering that I never say goodnight, and I remember how close I came to never seeing another Christmas at all. This happened on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, and I still can't hear a knock at the door after dark without my stomach dropping. Freshly back in my hometown after moving out of an apartment with my ex. My parents had gone to Florida to spend Christmas with my sister and her kids, and I'd volunteered to stay behind and watch the house, water the plants, and make sure the pipes didn't freeze. It's one of those quiet suburban streets where every house has the same plastic candy canes along the walkway, the same glowing reindeer on the lawn, and the same wreath on the door. My parents go all out every year. Their front bushes were wrapped in lights. There was a glowing Merry Christmas sign on the window, and inside the place looked like a Hallmark set. Tree in the corner, stockings on the mantle, cinnamon candle burning on the coffee table. It felt cozy and safe. That night, I did what I always do when I'm alone on holidays. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I made myself a frozen pizza, poured a couple glasses of wine, and put on a Christmas movie marathon. I FaceTimed my parents for a bit, held the phone up to the tree so my mom could gush over the ornaments, and then they went back to their warm rental in Florida, and I went back to my quiet living room in the Michigan cold. By 9:30, it was snowing steadily. The street outside was dead. No cars passing, no kids playing. Just that muffled silence you only get during a snowstorm. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. "Package delivered," the notification said. I frowned, because I hadn't ordered anything. I opened the message all the way. It showed a blurry night photo of a front porch. My parents' front porch. I hadn't heard the doorbell, but sometimes delivery drivers don't ring it, so I shrugged it off, slipped on my slippers, and went to the front hall. I flicked on the porch light and looked through the peephole. There was no package. Just a man. He was standing on the porch facing slightly away from the door, hood up, shoulders dusted with snow. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just relatively dark clothing, and work boots. One gloved hand was in his pocket, the other was holding his phone screen, glowing blue against his beard. As soon as I looked, he turned like he somehow felt it. He smiled and stepped closer to the door. I stepped back from instinct, even though there was still a solid door between us. The doorbell rang. He jabbed it like 3 or 4 times rapidly. I cleared my throat. Can I help you?" I called through the door. "Yeah, package for, I heard paper crinkle. "For Miller? This address, right? Must have gone to the wrong house. Just need a signature." My parents' last name is Miller, but I never told him that. "That's okay," I said. "You can just leave it." He laughed softly. It didn't sound like a delivery guy's laugh, if that makes sense. It sounded annoyed. "Come on, man. It's alcohol. I need a signature. You don't want this going back to the warehouse, trust me." Something about the way he said warehouse made my skin crawl. No company name, no tablet, no clearly visible package. "I'm good," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've got the wrong house." Then his tone changed. Not angry, but like flatter. "All right," he said. "Merry Christmas, then." I heard footsteps retreat down the porch steps. I waited a good 30 seconds, then peeked through the peephole again. He was still there. Not on the porch, but in the yard now, standing by our little light-up reindeer. He had his back to the house, head turned toward the street like he was watching or waiting for something. The porch light only caught the edge of his face, but I could see enough to tell he wasn't actually looking at the decorations. He was watching the houses. Watching which ones were dark, which ones were full? It was hard to say at the time, but it felt weird. I backed away from the door. For a few seconds, I considered calling the non-emergency police line, but it felt stupid. Guy standing outside doesn't sound that serious when you try to explain it. I told myself that he was just some sketchy private courier, turned off the foyer light, and went back to the couch. The movie played on, but I wasn't really watching anymore. Every now and then I muted it and listened. Nothing out of the ordinary. By 11 o'clock, I decided I freaked myself out enough. I did a quick walkthrough of the house, checked the back sliding door, the kitchen door to the garage, and the windows. Locked. All good. I turned off the lights downstairs, leaving only the Christmas tree on, and went upstairs to the guest room I'd been sleeping in. Lying in bed, scrolling my phone, I kinda convinced myself I'd overreacted. People stand outside sometimes. Not everybody is a serial killer just because their jacket isn't branded, I guess. I eventually dozed off. I don't know how long I was asleep when I woke up to a sound that, at first, my half-dreaming brain tried to explain away. Like something metal lightly hitting glass. Distant, dull, but inside the house. I held my breath. The house settled. The heater kicked on. Nothing else. I checked my phone at about 1:43 a.m., I think. I told myself it was just the heater or ice shifting on the roof. Rolled over and closed my eyes. Until I heard it again. This time with a scratch as well. I knew now it was undeniably from downstairs, and close, not through a wall. All the drowsiness vanished. I sat up, every sense suddenly tuned in. I could see the faint glow of the tree reflecting up the stairwell from under my door, so I knew the living room was still lit. I swung my legs out of bed and stood as quietly as I could, padding over to the door in my socks. I gently pressed my ear against it. For a few seconds, I heard nothing. Then, very clearly, the unmistakable sound of the backsliding door, shaking. The vertical blinds rattled softly. Then a hard, subtle thumping as somebody tested the lock from outside. My heart started racing in that sickening way where it feels like it's beating against your throat. Every instinct in me screamed, "Don't go down there," so I didn't. I backed away from the door, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and dialed 911, shaking. The operator answered, and I did my best to keep my voice low. "Somebody's trying to get into my house," I whispered. "From the back door. I'm upstairs." She asked my address, my name, and if I was alone. I told her. I could hear her typing, her voice calm. "Stay on the line with me, okay? Officers are on the way." Downstairs, the rattling stopped. For a few seconds, the silence was worse. Then came a new sound. A dull thud, like a shoulder hitting the door. Once, twice, then something else. Metal scraping. Tools, I thought. "Sir, are you in a locked room?" the operator asked. "Yes, upstairs bedroom. Door's locked." "Good. Stay there. Don't confront them." I wanted to say, "No worries, I'm not a hero," but my mouth was dry. One more heavy thud echoed through the house, then an awful cracking noise. Wood maybe, or plastic, I didn't know. But the next sound I recognized instantly. The subtle rubbery whoosh of the sliding door opening. The house went still after that in a way that was somehow even more terrifying than the noise. The heater clicked off, and I could hear nothing but the dispatcher and my own breathing. Then, finally, footsteps. Not trying to be quiet, but not stomping either. They crossed the tile in the kitchen, then transitioned onto the wood in the dining room. Every step got a little clearer as they moved towards the living room. I could picture it in my head. That guy from the porch standing in front of the glowing tree, looking at the presents under it, looking at the family photos on the wall, looking up the stairs. "I hear footsteps inside," I whispered. "They're almost there," the operator said. "Just stay calm and hidden." I moved away from the door and into the walk-in closet attached to the guest room. It was packed with my mom's old clothes, extra blankets, and boxes of decorations. I squeezed myself into the far corner, behind a hanging row of coats, and tried to breathe quietly. Below me, a drawer slid open. Something dropped. The footsteps moved closer to the base of the stairs. Each step up the staircase sounded heavier than the last. The wood creaked in that specific way I recognized from growing up in that house. Whoever was on the stairs was big. He paused about halfway up. For a second, I thought maybe he was listening. My phone screen was glowing faintly in my hands. I turned it face down and held my breath. The steps resumed, getting closer. Then I heard the slight shift, an echo that told me he'd reached the top of the stairs and turned into the hallway, right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob jiggled. He tried it once and twice. Then a quiet chuckle. "Really?" a man's voice said softly, like he was talking to himself. The knob jiggled harder, and there was a sharp bang as he threw his shoulder into it. The thin hollow corridor shuddered in his frame. I thought it would give. I flinched and almost dropped my phone. "Sir," the operator whispered in my ear, "are they at your door?" Yes, I mouthed more than I spoke. "Officers are close. You're doing good. Just stay where you are." Another hit. The door groaned. One of the hinges made a tiny popping sound. This wasn't going to hold forever. In that moment, I genuinely thought, I might have to fight this guy. I looked around the dark closet. There was nothing remotely weapon-like, except maybe a metal clothes rod, but it was bolted into the wall. My eyes landed on a heavy snow boot on the floor, and my brain offered up the brilliant suggestion of throwing it at him. I almost laughed from the adrenaline. The man paused between hits, and I heard him breathing on the other side of the door. We were maybe 6 feet apart, with an inch of wood separating us. Then, faint and far away at first, I heard it. Sirens. The man heard them too. There was a muttered curse, then hurried footsteps down the hall, pounding down the stairs, and the slam of the sliding door. "Sirens," I whispered. "Yes, that's them," the operator said. "They're outside. Stay put until an officer tells you it's safe to come out." I heard multiple voices outside, then pounding on the front door. "This is the police. Anyone inside, call out now." I finally stepped out of the closet, legs shaking so badly I had to steady myself on the dresser. I opened the bedroom door carefully. It stuck halfway. The frame splintered where the man had hit it, but it opened enough for me to squeeze out. I crept to the top of the stairs, hands up, and called out, "I'm upstairs. I live here." 2 officers came into view in the living room, guns drawn, flashlights sweeping. They holstered them when they saw I was alone and clearly not the guy they were looking for. Downstairs, the living room looked strangely violated. The tree was still glowing peacefully, but the sliding door at the back of the house was standing half open, cold air pouring in. The lock had been pried clean off, the frame chipped and shredded. Wet boot prints led from the deck to the kitchen, across the floor to the base of the stairs. They walked me through the house while other officers checked around the property. Nothing obvious was missing. My laptop was still on the coffee table. The TV was on the wall and my wallet was upstairs. But in the kitchen, one drawer was left open. That's where my dad keeps the knives. One was missing. That was probably the worst part to find out. Later, when everything settled down and the adrenaline gave way to exhaustion, one of the officers told me there had been a string of Christmas Eve burglaries the last couple of years. Houses that were clearly decorated, clearly had gifts, and looked empty. A lot of them had older folks living there who were out of town visiting family. "You probably saw your parents leave and assumed the place would be vacant all week," the officer said. "Saw the lights. Maybe watched the house for a while. Wrong place, wrong time for him that you stayed." I thought about the guy on the porch with the fake package, testing to see if anyone would open up. The time delivery notification. The fact that he knew the last name before I'd ever confirmed it. I also thought about how easy it would have been to just crack the door, sign some fake form, and let him put one foot inside. This day, I'm grateful I didn't. My parents replaced the door, added cameras, and got a security system. They double-check every lock religiously now. I still house sit for them, but I don't try to play it cool anymore. If anything feels off, I call somebody. I check the cameras. I turn on more lights than I probably need. And every Christmas Eve, when the street goes quiet and the snow deadens every sound, I always find myself listening once the movies are off and the house is dark. It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he left them at my apartment. One night I was bored and I decided to go and try the goggles out at a wooden hiking area / nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself and female, but I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign park closes at 10, and entered the woods. Night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times, I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity. Hopefully the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggle. I don't know if you ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day. Everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little bit more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see though, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man dressed head to toe in dark colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter anyway. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation. A young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for whoever or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remember the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I had been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car, if he'd circled back and seen my parked car alone in the lot, if he'd come in after me. I sat paralyzed with fear and watched the man for what felt like forever, but it was probably another half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Screw it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and somebody had scraped all down the sides of my car with something sharp, presumably a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. So I'm thankful for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and I'm thankful for big trees with sturdy branches. The following account occurred roughly 3 years ago during the summer of 2012. It's always been difficult for me to talk about, but I have found writing about it to be therapeutic. I was 17 at the time and I had just gotten my first job. I lived in rural Western Virginia in a small mountain community. My mom's friend owned a camping resort not far from my house that had a general store, and said she'd pay me to help out in the store during the busy months in the summer. It was a pretty easy job, and I met a lot of out-of-towners, which was nice because our community could get so isolated. Most of us lived pretty far away from each other. One day, a big burly mountain man type came into the store. He was in his late 40s, early 50s, probably 6'5" and about 280 pounds. He looked really dirty, like he worked outside a lot. His clothes were sort of tattered and he had a long beard. We had a few of the woodsy hermit types in the area, and he definitely looked like one of them. He bought some basic items, one of which was one of our homemade bars of soap. When he came to the register, he looked me up and down carefully. He didn't talk for a minute, just stared. His people skills clearly needed work. "Did you make this soap?" he asked gruffly. "Possibly," I said. "I help out with that sometimes." "You make a lot of your own stuff?" "Toiletries and things like that, yeah." "I like that," he said, nodding to himself. I honestly didn't know how to respond. I quickly rang up his items and he paid with crumpled money. Right before he left, he asked, "You cook too?" "Sometimes," I replied. "Bet the boys around here are itching to marry you," he said as he smiled to himself. I said nothing. I was puzzled as to what I said that stood out as wife material. I told Krista, my mom's friend / boss, about the bizarre encounter and she laughed it off. So did my family and friends. But then, Mountain Man started turning up more often. We chatted a little bit here and there and I found out he had a cabin in the woods, which he claimed he built with his bare hands. He said he hunted and lived off the land, other than the things he bought at the store. One time, he even said I had the birds and hips that men lust after, and I shuddered. He even started inviting me to fish with him, hunt with him, see his place, etc., and I always politely declined. But he got more and more consistent. I told Krista about how uncomfortable he was starting to make me. The intensity with which he said those things really scared me. He said that when he came in, just to go get her and she would ring him up. So, thanks to her, I started speaking to him less, and I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But one night I was closing up and it was late, around 10 at night. Krista had left about an hour before and I was leaving by myself. The only two cars in front of the store were an old blue pickup and mine. I was immediately alarmed because I knew Mountain Man drove a blue pickup, but I didn't see him in the lot, just his car, so I walked quickly to my car and checked the back seat before I started her up. But then when I first turned the key in the ignition, I got nothing but sputters. I tried several more times and got scared quickly. Of all nights, why is this happening tonight? I remember asking myself angrily. Just as I was reaching for my phone to call for help, there was a loud pounding on the driver's side window. I'm shocked I didn't piss myself. I didn't even want to look because I knew it was him, but I did and my suspicions were confirmed. He smiled a big grin at me, showing me exactly which teeth were missing. "Need some help?" he said loudly through the window. I shook my head furiously. "My dad is on his way," I said, hoping to scare him off. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. Mountain Man laughed. "No, he's not," he said. "Open the door." The hairs on my neck stood up straight. How did he know I was bluffing? "No," I said firmly. "Leave me alone." Suddenly, he looked angry. He pulled the handle, but I had locked all the doors when I first got in. He kept furiously pulling the handle and started pounding on the window. "Leave now or I'm calling the cops," I screamed at him. He clearly wasn't getting the message, so I pulled out my phone and called 911. I must have sounded hysterical to the dispatcher, and I knew she could hear him pounding. He said that she would have officers out ASAP, but out here, that could be a while. "The cops are on their way. Leave now," I screamed at the Mountain Man, who didn't seem to let it deter him. But after a few more minutes of pounding, he suddenly stopped and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, hopeful that he would leave me alone. Then he started walking back towards me with a freaking crowbar in hand. "No," I screamed at him. "Get the heck away from me." He started swinging out the driver's side window with the crowbar. I ducked down into the passenger seat on the floor and covered the back of my neck like they teach you in those tornado drills. I heard the sickening crack of the window, but not for long. Suddenly, I heard male voices shouting, telling the man to get away from the car. I sat up and saw two men approaching, one with a shotgun pointed at him. I recognized them as a couple of guests staying at the resort for a camping trip. I breathed a sigh of relief and got out of the car, telling them that the police were on the way. I thanked them profusely as we waited for the police, and surprisingly, Mountain Man didn't make any moves to get away, but the cops came pretty quickly after that, so he didn't have much of a chance. They took him away and I gave them my statement. I was pretty shaken up for a while afterwards. A few weeks later, I finally got the scoop on the man. Apparently, he had a history of mental illness. He had been in and out of state institutions. He really had been living in an old cabin in the woods where he wasn't taking his meds and his issues were only getting worse. My cousin Luke is a cop, and later on he told me some more about the case that he had heard about through some other officers. The police did a search of the cabin after the incident to see if there was anything that might be of interest to them. They found a journal that the Mountain Man kept. Apparently in it, he said he was lonely and wanted a wife. He mentioned me by name a lot, my stupid name tag, and Luke said there were a lot of lewd things in there about me that he didn't want to share, but tried to put it simply by saying that the man had a detailed plan to abduct me, starting with sabotaging my car engine to get me into a vulnerable position. When Luke said that, I nearly bursted into tears, thinking about how horribly that night could have gone if those two men hadn't come along. Thankfully, he has been put back into a state institution. With any luck, he'll stay there for good.
I was 16 when my parents left me alone overnight for the first time. My older sister had gotten into some serious trouble at her college 3 states away. My parents got the call around 3 in the afternoon and were on the road by 4. Said they'd be back by tomorrow night at the latest. I'd never been alone in the house overnight before. We lived in a coastal area where the nearest neighbor was a quarter mile down the road. Around 8:30 that evening, a storm rolled in with heavy rain and wind rattling the windows. I was in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. A girl, maybe around 20, was standing on the porch holding a bag of takeout. She was soaking with rain dripping off her jacket. I opened the door but kept the screen door locked between us and asked what she needed. She said she had a delivery for someone and read off a name I didn't recognize. I told her she had the wrong house. She looked confused, checked her phone, and insisted this was the address she'd been given. I said sorry and told her to call them and figure it out. She nodded but didn't leave. She said the weather was awful and asked if she could wait inside until it cleared up a bit. I told her there was a motel about a mile down the road where she could wait. Her face changed entirely. The puppy face disappeared, and anger took over. She asked why I couldn't just let her in for a few minutes, that it was pouring, and she was freezing. I told her my parents weren't home, and I wasn't allowed to let strangers inside. She went quiet for a second, then simply turned and walked back to her car in the rain. I watched her get in a small sedan and drive away, then closed the door and locked it. Something about the whole thing felt off. I realized I'd made a mistake telling her I was all by myself. I went back to the living room but couldn't focus on the TV. I was hyper aware of the smallest movement around me. Less than an hour later, a faint thud started echoing from the back of the house. I got up, went to the kitchen, and looked out the window. A man was standing in the backyard, donning a black raincoat. He was tall, maybe in his 30s, and was trying to peek into the house. My heart started pounding. I ducked out of his direct line of sight and watched him move around. He walked past the back door, stopped, and knocked. I didn't move or answer. He knocked again and called out, asking if anyone was home, that he was looking for his daughter. He said she'd come to this address for a delivery and hadn't come home yet. I stayed silent. He tried the door handle, but it was locked. He moved on, walking around the side of the house. The motion sensor lights started turning on, one by one, tracking his path as he circled the property. I realized what was happening. I immediately went back to the living room, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher everything. She told me to stay on the line, and that officers were on their way. While I was on the phone, I heard more noises at the back door again. I looked through the kitchen doorway. The girl was back and was trying the handle. Suddenly, she picked a stone and hurled it at the window. The small window next to the back door exploded inward, and I saw the man's hand reach through, feeling for the lock. I ran upstairs, into the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. I pressed my back against it and kept the phone in my ear. The dispatcher was asking if I was okay. I whispered that they'd broken down a window and were trying to get inside. I could hear them move downstairs. They were checking the drawers and cabinets. The man's voice told the girl to check upstairs. My heart nearly stopped breathing. She was walking up the stairs and stopped right outside the bathroom door. The handle turned but didn't open. The dispatcher told me to lay low and that officers were 2 minutes away. She kicked the door hard. The frame cracked but held. Right then, sirens started wailing in the distance, getting louder. The footsteps retreated fast. I heard them running back downstairs. The back door slammed, and a car engine started. Soon, an office knocked at the bathroom door. They asked if I was okay and searched the property with flashlights. They found footprints in the mud near the back door, broken glass in the kitchen, and fresh tire marks in the driveway. But the girl and the man were gone. One officer asked what the girl looked like. I described her. He said there had been similar incidents in other coastal towns. My parents got back the next night. I told them everything. They were furious that they left me alone and said they would never have gone if they'd known something like this could happen. They installed a security system the following week with cameras on every door, motion sensors, and alarms. The police never found them. I wonder how many houses they tried before mine. How many people let the girl inside because she seemed harmless. Because it was raining and she was young and alone. How many people couldn't call 911 in time? I got lucky. I know that. If I'd hesitated even a few minutes longer, if I'd felt guilty enough to let her wait inside, if I hadn't lied about my parents being close, maybe I wouldn't have lived to tell the tale. I was 14 when my dad got transferred for work at a plant 2 hours from where we lived my whole life. We packed up everything in July and moved into a small cottage about 10 minutes from the beach. The house was old, but nice, with wood floors and big windows facing the water. We'd only been there 3 weeks when it happened. My parents had to drive out of state to visit my grandmother in the hospital. They didn't want to leave me alone, but I insisted I'd be fine. I was 13, not a little kid. Plus we had Bruno, our German Shepherd mix. He was protective and alert. I felt safe with him around. They left around 4 in the afternoon and left me money for pizza and a list of emergency numbers on the fridge. I spent the first couple hours watching TV in the living room. Bruno was on the couch next to me, half asleep. Around 7:30, Bruno's head lifted and his ears went up. He started that low growl he did when something was wrong. I muted the TV and listened. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I caught a soft sound from the kitchen, like a drawer being opened and closed. My stomach tightened. I got up slowly and walked toward the kitchen doorway. Bruno followed, still growling. The back porch light was on, but I was sure I turned it off hours back. I stood there trying to convince myself I was wrong, that maybe I had turned it on and forgotten, but I knew I hadn't. Bruno's growl got louder. He was staring at the kitchen with his body tense. I took a step forward and looked around the corner. The back door was closed and everything looked normal. But something felt off. One of the kitchen drawers wasn't closed all the way, just slightly open, like someone had looked inside and pushed it shut but missed. I backed away from the kitchen slowly and grabbed Bruno's collar, pulling him with me toward the basement door. I got us both down the stairs as quietly as possible, into the small junk closet, and locked the door behind us. I pulled out my phone and tried calling my parents. They didn't answer. They were probably in the hospital, where phones had to be on silent mode. I texted them what was happening with shaking hands, then called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone might be in my house, that I was hiding in the basement closet with my dog, and that my parents were out of town. She told me to stay where I was and that officers were on their way. She asked if I could hear anyone moving around. I listened. At first there was silence, but then I heard footsteps above us, in the study. I thought it moved toward the front of the house. The dispatcher stayed on the line and kept asking if I was okay. I could barely answer. The footsteps came back and stopped at the top of the basement stairs. The door opened slowly. I held my breath. Bruno went completely still beside me. The footsteps came down the stairs and stopped at the bottom. I could hear them breathing. They were standing right outside the closet door. A man's voice came through the door. He said he knew I was in there and that he could hear my dog. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it. He tried the door handle, but it didn't open. He said I should just open the door and give him whatever valuables were in the house. Said he was hungry and didn't want any trouble. Just needed some cash and electronics. The dispatcher was still on the line, listening. She told me not to engage, so I stayed silent. The man tried the handle again, harder this time. I screamed and told him I was on the phone with 911 and that the police were already on their way. He went silent. Then I heard him run up the stairs and through the house. The dispatcher asked if he was gone. I said I thought so, but wasn't sure. She told me to stay in the closet until the officers arrived. I sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 8 or 9 minutes. Finally, I heard sirens and voices upstairs calling out that it was the police. I came out of the closet with Bruno right beside me. 2 officers were upstairs. They asked if I was hurt, and I said no. They searched the entire house and found the back door unlocked. There were muddy footprints through the kitchen and into the living room. One officer said the guy probably thought the house was empty and broke in, then realized someone was home when he heard the TV or Bruno. but instead of leaving immediately, he looked around and opened drawers. By the time I noticed him, he'd probably been inside for several minutes. The officers called a neighbor whose number was on the emergency list my parents left. Mrs. Smith, an older woman who lived 3 houses down, came over immediately and said I could stay with her until my parents got back. I packed a bag, took Bruno, and left with Mrs. Smith. My parents got home around 2 in the morning and came straight to Mrs. Smith's house. My mom was crying before she even got through the door. They filed a police report the next day and got better locks installed. My grandmother recovered eventually and came home from the hospital a few weeks later. But the house never felt the same after that. I couldn't be alone there anymore. Even during the day, I'd feel uneasy. At night it was worse. Every sound made me jump. We lived there another 1.5 years before my dad got transferred again. I was relieved when we moved. But I still check every door twice before going to bed. Still can't shake the memory of sitting in that closet, hearing footsteps come down the basement stairs, and hearing that voice telling me to open the door. I was 18 when my parents left me alone for 4 days. I was old enough to take care of myself. Our house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by trees on 3 sides. The first day was fine. I went to work at the grocery store, came home late, and watched TV until midnight before I fell asleep. On day 2, I noticed a green pickup truck parked on the side of the road near the entrance to our driveway on the way home from my shift. I drove past it and up the driveway, then looked in my rearview mirror. The truck was still there, but by the time I parked and went inside, it was gone. I told myself it was nothing. Someone probably pulled over to check their phone. That night, I heard movement near the side of the house. It could have been an animal or branches scraping in the wind. So, I turned on the porch light and looked out the window, but there was nothing. Slightly shaken, I went to bed but couldn't sleep at all. The next day, I took a leave and kept an eye on the surroundings. But everything seemed normal, like how it had always been. I was eating my supper when I caught a quick flash of something reflective near the tree line, like light catching on glass or metal. I stared at the trees for a whole minute, but couldn't spot any movement. I got up and quickly locked all doors and windows. Then I called my best friend Lena and asked her to come over. I told her I was feeling creeped out being alone in the house. Lena agreed and got there around 10, and having someone else in the house instantly made me feel better. For the next few hours, we sat in the living room with our textbooks. Lena asked if I'd forgotten to pay the electric bill. I told her my parents had taken care of everything before they left. I pulled out my phone and checked the power company's website. There were no reported outages in our area. Suddenly, the sound of the footsteps echoed on the gravel outside. We both froze. The footsteps approached and stopped just outside the back door. We just sat there in the dark listening. A shadow passed across the glass panel of the back door. Someone was out there. Lena grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the garage. We went in through the connecting door and locked it behind us. My car was in the driveway, but my dad's truck was in the garage. We climbed into the truck and locked the doors. Lena called 911 and whispered our address, saying someone was trying to get into the house. The dispatcher told us to stay where we were. Through the small garage window, we could see into the house. The back door opened. A man entered. He was donning a dark hoodie and was of average height. He had his phone out with the flashlight on. He walked through the kitchen slowly and opened a few drawers before moving into the living room, where our textbooks were still spread out on the floor. He stood there for a moment looking at them, then went upstairs. I knew where he was going. My bedroom was the first door at the top of the stairs. We sat in the truck watching. I could literally hear my heartbeat in my ear. Lena was shaking. I couldn't see into my room from where we were, but I could see the light from his phone moving around up there. He was in there for maybe 5 minutes, then came back downstairs and walked into the living room. He stood there for a few seconds before he started cooing my name softly as if he was calling his dog. My stomach turned. He knew who I was and was specifically out to get me. Lena grabbed my hand so hard her nails dug in. I didn't realize we were both sobbing. He'd call my name again and again. Sometimes he'd sing and laugh. Then he'd get angry and snap. He started throwing things on the floor, and Lena and I nearly jumped out of our skin. This went on for forever until we heard sirens in the distance getting closer. He heard them too. The flashlight went off, and we heard the back door open again. Through the window, we watched him run toward the trees. By the time the police pulled up, he was gone. 2 officers searched the property with flashlights. One of them found him about 100 yards into the woods and brought him back in handcuffs. Another officer came to the garage and knocked on the window, telling us it was safe to come out. My blood turned to ice when I saw who it was. Mr. Carson was our high school janitor, and I saw him almost every day for 4 years. He'd always been friendly and helpful. He had a daughter my age, and often asked how my classes were going and what my plans were. The officer took our statements and told us how Mr. Carson had jimmied the lock and used the breaker box to shut the power off. My parents came home early the next morning. Lena stayed with me until they arrived. We didn't sleep. We just sat in the living room with all the lights on. Mr. Carson was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted burglary. He took a plea deal, and I didn't have to testify. He's in prison now and won't be out for a few more years. I graduated that spring and went to college out of state. Haven't been back to that house since. What haunts me most is how normal he seemed. How many times I'd walked past him in the hallway without thinking twice. How he'd smiled and waved, and I'd smiled back. Lena and I are still close. We don't talk about that night much, but sometimes it comes up. She says she's glad she was there, and she doesn't want to think about what would have happened if I'd been alone. I don't want to think about it either. But I do. All the time. It still freaks me out.
I was 16 when this happened. It was the summer of 2015, and my parents had gone to the Keys for a week-long vacation. We lived just outside of Tampa in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every driveway looked the same. Palm trees out front, stucco walls, and lawns that always smelled faintly of cut grass and rain. They left early on a Thursday morning. I remember because my dad made a joke about me holding down the fort, and my mom told me not to invite anybody over. I wasn't planning to anyway. It was just going to be me and my dog Max, a 90-pound golden retriever who was more like a brother than a pet. That first day was fine. I played Xbox, ate junk food, took Max on a long walk, and fell asleep watching YouTube. The weird part didn't start until the second night. It was close to midnight. I was on the couch scrolling through Reddit when Max lifted his head and gave this low growl. Not a bark, just that deep rumbling sound that dogs make when they're unsure about something. At first I figured it was the rain. Florida storms roll in all the time, and the thunder sometimes shakes the windows. But when I muted the TV, I realized it wasn't thunder. It was a tapping sound. Not a knock exactly, more like somebody brushing their fingers against the door. I froze. I told myself it could have been the wind hitting the screen door, or maybe a frog. We got big ones that sometimes jumped on the glass at night. But Max was staring directly at the door now, ears pointed, muscles stiff. I stood up, heart thudding, and peeked through the blinds. The porch light was on. Nothing. No car in the driveway and no movement. But still, something felt wrong. I double-checked the locks on the front and back doors, shut every window, and went back to the couch. Max stayed alert for another 10 minutes before finally laying his head back down. I didn't realize it then, but that was just the beginning. The next day was hot, mid-90s, humid, the kind of air that sticks to your skin. I spent the afternoon throwing a ball with Max in the backyard, but I couldn't shake the feeling from last night. Around 3 p.m., I noticed the side gate was open. My dad always kept it padlocked. He was obsessed with security. I walked over and saw the latch was bent, like somebody had pried it with a screwdriver or something. That's when the chill hit me. I called my parents right away. My dad told me it was probably just the landscapers who forgot to close it. Don't stress, he said. Just keep the dog inside and lock up at night. That's what I did. When the night came, I made sure every door was locked, curtains were closed, and lights off, except for one lamp in the living room. Max laying beside the couch, half asleep but twitching his ears every few seconds. Around 1 a.m. I heard it again. A tapping sound, but this time it wasn't the front door. It came from the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. The sound was softer than before, like somebody was running a fingernail across the glass. Max exploded into barking, the kind that rattles your chest. I jumped up, grabbed my phone, and flicked on the porch light. For a split second, just a flash, I saw somebody dart away from the door. Shape. A man. Couldn't see his face, but I caught a white t-shirt, dark shorts, and a glint. Maybe a flashlight. My stomach dropped. I called 911 immediately, trying to sound calm even though my voice was shaking. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked, and that an officer would be there soon. It took them about 15 minutes to arrive. By then, whoever it was long gone. The cop checked around the yard, found nothing but a few footprints in the sands near the fence, and told me it was probably a prowler. Happens sometimes, he said, especially around the weekends. I couldn't sleep that night, and neither did Max. By Sunday, I was paranoid. I checked every corner of the house before dark, locked the doors twice, and even blocked the sliding door with a broom handle. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and went to bed. Max curled up beside my bed like always. I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching. It took me a second to register what it was. The driveway. Somebody was walking up the driveway. Then came the unmistakable creak of the side gate opening. My heart slammed into my chest. I reached over and grabbed the aluminum bat I kept by my bed. Max was already up, hackles raised, teeth bared. The footsteps moved slowly across the backyard, then stopped right outside my bedroom window. Then another sound. Whisper. It was faint, muffled through the wall, but I swear I heard somebody say, "Come here, boy." Max went ballistic. He jumped at the window, barking so loud it made my ears ring. The voice vanished. I waited for what felt like an hour, every muscle in my body tense, but no more sounds came. At dawn, I walked outside with Max. The grass was wet with dew, and near the window I saw fresh footprints. Bare feet. That's when I knew this wasn't random. Whoever this was, they wanted inside. I didn't want to tell my parents because I knew they'd cut their trip short. But by Monday night, I was exhausted, jumpy, and ready for it to be over. I fell asleep around midnight with Max on the floor beside the bed. Around 3 a.m., the sound that woke me up wasn't tapping this time. It was literally glass shattering. The sliding door. I bolted upright. Max lunged out of the room before I could grab him, barking like a maniac. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I heard heavy footsteps, somebody running inside the house. The air smelled like wet grass and sweat. I grabbed my phone and the bat and crept toward the hall. "Max," I whispered, but his barking drowned me out. Then came a thud. A man's voice. Low, angry, and close. "Shut up, dog." The sound of a struggle. I turned the corner just in time to see a man in a dark hoodie and jeans in the living room, wrestling with Max. The guy was swinging something, maybe a crowbar. Max was clamped on his arm though, refusing to let go. The man yelled in pain and slammed Max against the coffee table, but Max didn't stop. He kept biting, growling, and dragging the man backward. That's when adrenaline took over. I charged and swung the bat as hard as I could. It hit his shoulder with a crack, and he screamed, stumbling toward the door. He yanked free, bolted out the shattered slider, and disappeared into the yard. I slammed the broom handle back into the track, locked the door as best I could, and called 911 again. Voice cracked so bad that the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat the address twice. When the cops arrived, the guy was gone. They found a trail of blood leading across the yard to the fence. Then nothing. Max had a cut on his ear and a limp, but he was alive. The police stayed for over an hour, taking fingerprints, photos, and everything. One officer told me I was lucky the dog was there. That could have been a lot worse. I didn't argue. My parents got home that afternoon. My mom broke down crying when she saw the broken door, and my dad hugged me tighter than he ever had before. For the next few days, the police patrolled the neighborhood. They said a few houses nearby had reported somebody trying to break in over the past week, mostly during late hours, always when people were home alone. 2 days later, I got a call from the detective handling the case. They had caught him. A man in his late 20s had been arrested just a few neighborhoods over after trying to force his way into yet another house. He matched my description. Same hoodie, same build, and had deep bite marks on his forearm. He had priors for burglary and assault. When they asked how he got hurt, he said a dog went psycho on him. Damn right he did. It's been 10 years since that night, but I still live with the image burned into my memory. The man's silhouette in the dark, Max's fur bristling, the sound of glass breaking. People always talk about instincts, but I think animals sense evil before we do. Max knew from the very first tap on the door that something wasn't right. Unfortunately, he died 3 years ago. Old and tired, but still protective to the end. I buried him under the oak tree in our backyard. The same yard where he saved my life. Every once in a while, I'll wake up in the middle of the night when the wind rattles the window or the rain hits the glass, and I'll think about that summer. The broken gate, the whisper outside. And I'll remember how close I came to being another name in a newspaper headline, if it hadn't been for a good dog who refused to back down.
This happened back when I was in high school, but it's something that I will never forget. I was home alone for the weekend. My parents went out of town for a work conference, and they both worked at the same company. This happened a few times a year, and it was always fun for me, because when I was home alone, I would just eat pizza and play video games and stay up late. It was cool to have that kind of independence in high school, and my older brother was in college, so it was cool to have the whole place to myself. Our neighborhood was pretty nice. We were not super rich or anything, but overall it was one of the nicer neighborhoods in our city. So I remember on Friday night with my parents out of town, I had been hanging out around the house just playing video games and stuff after I had got back from school. I was planning to just stay up until I got too tired to stay awake anymore, and it would probably be about 1 a.m. or so. I remember that at around 10 o'clock at night there was a knock at the front door to the house. I went over to a front window to look out of it before answering the door to see who was there. Even though I was experienced in being home alone, it was still always a little creepy at night, or if somebody was at the door. We didn't really get many people at the door, especially late at night. After looking out the window, I saw a cop standing on the front step. Surprisingly to me, right after I noticed him, he looked over and noticed me in the window. He smiled and waved at me in a friendly way. Seeing now that it was a cop, I figured I'd better answer the door for him. And he seemed cheerful, so I didn't think it was anything bad. I went over to the door and opened it. The policeman said hi and sorry to bother me so late at night. He was nice, but something about him seemed a little off. I didn't know what it was, if it was his uniform or something like that, or how he was talking or what. But after I said hi, he told me that he was looking for a suspect in the area. He said that he didn't want to scare me, but he had reason to believe that the suspect might be hiding out in the area, possibly in someone's backyard. Then he asked me if I had seen or heard anything strange, and I said no because I hadn't. He then asked me if my parents or anybody else was home, and I said no. Obviously I wasn't going to lie to a cop. So he then told me that I was probably not in any danger, but he just wanted to look around in our backyard. I said that it was okay, and then he left. The whole thing seemed a little weird, but overall I didn't think too much of it. I was sort of creeped out that there was a suspect in the area, but if a cop was here looking for him, I felt safer about it. So I just went back to my video games at that point. About 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the front door. I went there and saw that the cop was back. I opened the door and he told me that he was working with other law enforcement and the FBI or something like that. I don't remember the exact words he used, but that was basically what he was saying. Something along those lines. He then said that they had an investigation going. He told me to go and leave the back door unlocked and to stay away from that area of the house. I must have had a confused look on my face at that point. The cop then said that he couldn't get into any details but to trust him, and the matter would be resolved by the morning, and that I was probably safe. I said okay, and then I went in the house and unlocked the back door. Then I went back over to the cop and told him that I did. He said that he would be in touch, and then he left. After that, I was super confused. I was trying to think of why I would have to unlock the back door. Did the cops want to use my house as a hideout or something? I had no idea, but I stayed away from that part of the house like I was instructed. Then I went back to playing video games for probably an hour or so. But the whole time, I was feeling more and more creeped out. I didn't feel safe going to sleep. I was paranoid that the criminal guy might get in the back door of the house that was now unlocked. I looked out a window into the backyard, but there was nothing. No cops, nobody at all. I knew that I wouldn't get any sleep, and it was now almost midnight, so I decided to call the local police department. I wanted to get more information or an update of if the guy was caught. Maybe they had found the guy and I wasn't in any danger at all. So I called the police and explained the situation. I was met with confusion at first, but I was soon told that there was no police officer investigating anything in the area and that the guy I encountered sounded like a fake cop. There was no suspect in the area either. They told me to lock the door and said that they would send a real officer to my house. So I quickly ran down and locked the back door to the house. Then I waited. When the real officer got there, he was way different than the other guy. From the way he talked to how his uniform looked, it was way more professional, and I realized that the other guy was definitely a fake. The real cops looked around for the guy for a while, but they couldn't find him. Then they left. After that, the fake cop never returned. I was a little scared for the rest of the weekend, but nothing else happened. Looking back, it was a crazy situation. I think the fake cop was planning to break into our house or something. He probably was going to wait until later that night when I was maybe asleep. I also think that he was nearby in the area and he must have seen the real cops there, and that's why he never returned. Either that or possibly he did try to enter the house, but the door was locked, so he went away. I also think he might have been working with someone else. Either way, he was a fake, and I'm glad that I called the real police about the situation. I've been a police officer for a while now. I will tell you the experience that I have so far that creeps me out the most. This was when I was pretty new to being an officer. I was on patrol and driving the pretty standard police car. It was late at night and probably about 11 p.m. There was a call for a noise complaint that I was going to investigate. To me, it seemed like not that big of a deal, but you never know what can happen. So it was just me going to the scene. No other officers were there or going to go there. I drove to the address and the neighborhood was pretty quiet, but average for the most part. I guess I would say that the houses were a little more spread out here with larger yards. There was also a good amount of trees in the area. And on this particular street, many of the houses had large woods bordering the ends of their backyards. This was part of a nearby park and golf course, and overall just more wild area. This street was kind of the last one in the neighborhood before the more wild land. So anyways, I parked my car on the side of the road in front of the address. Then I walked up the sidewalk and up the driveway. The house in question looked old, and it looked like nobody was home. I observed that all the windows were covered by shades, and all the lights in the house appeared to be off as well. The grass in the front yard was overgrown, and there were no cars in the driveway. Overall, the entire property was in rough shape. I wasn't hearing any noise though, so I walked up to the front door and tried ringing the doorbell. I heard nothing at all. After a little while, I knocked on the door, but there was still nothing. I waited about a minute and looked around. The whole neighborhood was very quiet. I looked at the house number, and I was definitely at the right address. I knocked one more time and announced myself. There was still nothing. As I was standing there on the front step and looking around, I saw a neighbor. A car drove down the street and pulled into the driveway next door. I left the front step and started walking over to them. The neighbor parked in the driveway of their house and then left the car. It was a woman, and I waved to her and then walked over. I asked her if she knew the neighbors next door at all, and I pointed to the house. She told me that nobody lived there and that the house had been abandoned for a while. This surprised me to hear that, but it also didn't surprise me that much given the condition of the property. I asked her if anybody ever went there or if she heard loud noises. She said no, and she wasn't aware of anybody ever being there. I told her to have a good night, and then I walked back over to the house, feeling confused. I was going to knock one more time and then I guess leave, because there didn't seem to be anybody there and there wasn't any noise going on that I heard. When I got back over to the front step, I was approaching it, and I was sure that I heard somebody inside. It was the sound of somebody moving away from the front of the house and walking towards the back of it. The footsteps were easy to hear because of how quiet it was. After hearing this, I knocked on the door again and announced myself. I really thought that they would answer that time. I knew someone was in there, but still, there was nothing. I stood there for about another minute, and then I left the front step, but I did not leave. Instead, I walked around to the side of the house and then the backyard. I was wondering if maybe there was a more common door used, such as one at the side, and I was also curious to see if there were any signs of people in the backyard or other places on the property. Possibly there would be sign of forced entry if the house was in fact vacant and somebody had broken in. It was very dark back there. I walked around but didn't see anything out of the normal. It was very overgrown back there as well, and so that didn't help much. I spent maybe 5 minutes walking the property and then went back around. When I got towards the front of the house again, I heard a loud noise. It sounded like something being smashed, almost like somebody was taking a baseball bat to the kitchen and just smashing stuff. It was very loud. I couldn't see in the windows and obviously did not know what it was, but I now knew what the noise complaint had probably been about. I walked back over to the front step quickly and then I banged on the front door. The loud noises had gone on for maybe 30 seconds. As soon as I knocked on the door though, they abruptly stopped. Once more, nobody came to the door and the house became silent again. As I was standing there on the step, I suddenly heard the back door to the house open. When it did, I instantly left the step and ran around the house. I got into the backyard and saw a man standing at the backside of the yard. I yelled at him to stop, but he didn't even turn back and look at me. He was not running, but walking rather quickly and heading straight for the woods. I ran after him as the guy entered the thick forest. I couldn't make out much about him because I really only saw his backside. By the time I reached the woods, he had been in there for a good 30 seconds. It was really overgrown back there and also very hard to see. Using my flashlight, I walked around in the woods looking for the man. I called out for him multiple times, and I sort of heard noises in the distance for a while, and I walked towards them, but soon things were quiet again. I looked around the woods for a good 10 minutes, but could not find the guy. Then I went back to the house. I called in what happened on the radio, and another officer in the area joined me on the scene. The back door to the house was wide open. and the house was confirmed to be vacant as well. Inside the house, it looked like things had been smashed with a bat, but nobody else was in there. We looked around more, but never found the man. Something about that night just really creeped me out, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Maybe that's because it was my first time dealing with a situation where things went kind of unexpected. I'm really not sure what was going on there. I think the guy inside thought that I had left when I went in the backyard, and that's why he was smashing stuff again. Why he was smashing stuff at all, though, I don't know, and why he was even in the house, I also don't know, because the property was vacant. But when he left, he just kind of disappeared in the woods, and that was really strange. Overall, it was a crazy experience. A few years ago, I lived in an apartment by myself. I worked a job that I no longer have, but for the job I would work all kinds of odd hours. It really messed up my sleep schedule, so I'm glad that I no longer work there. But one thing that I would do a lot in that time period is go on walks late at night, or all kinds of weird hours really. I would also sometimes walk in the early hours of the morning. Near my apartment there was this really long walking trail. It went from the apartment complex to a park nearby, and a large part of the path went through the woods. In that area, the woods was massive, and it was also very dense. It was common to see animals such as deer or sometimes fox or even coyotes near the path. I know that walking on the path in the woods seems creepy at night, and it is, but I really wasn't that scared. I would walk the trail during the day too, but with my sleep schedule messed up, I'd go a lot at night. It would usually help me to be able to sleep when I would get back, and so that was part of why I would go. It was relaxing, and being outside in the fresh air also made me more relaxed when I got back home. And as you could guess, when I walked at night, I would never see anybody. The trail was quiet as it was, but during the nighttime there would never be anyone. Sometimes outside closer to the apartment complex here and there, I might see people taking their dogs out or something. But once I got into the woods, there was never anyone. I remember up until the night of this story, the scariest experience I had in the woods was when I came across a couple of deer. I heard a noise in the woods and it spooked me, but when I saw the deer, they crossed the path and I just kept going. So on this night, I went out at about 2 a.m. I had recently returned home from work, and it was a nice but cool evening. I wanted to get some fresh air and exercise, and then go back and go to bed. When I got out there that night, things were quiet like usual. I didn't see anyone. I got into the woods and walked pretty far. I was maybe 20 minutes out there on the trail, and like right in the middle of the thick forest. As I was walking, suddenly I noticed up ahead blue and red flashing police lights. They looked like they were coming from up the trail and right in the middle of the woods. They were to my left, and I thought that it was really strange, but it was hard to tell exactly where the lights were coming from because of how dark it was out there. I was confused nevertheless. I thought that maybe it was coming from a street in the distance behind the woods, and I was just seeing it through the woods. But the more I walked and the closer I got, it looked a lot more like the lights were coming from right in the middle of the forest off the trail. There were really no other paths going off trail, so this was strange. I kept going, and soon got as close as I could on trail to the lights. I looked at them, and they were definitely in the woods. I didn't really hear anything though, nobody talking or moving through the woods. I kept watching the lights, trying to make sense of them. Then I decided to take a few steps off the trail and into the forest to investigate. However, as I started to go off trail, the lights suddenly turned off. It was really strange. I now hardly saw anything in the dark. For some reason, I called out asking if anybody was there. Looking back, I don't know why I did that, but nevertheless, when I did, I got no response. I heard nothing at all. So at that point, I was feeling kind of creeped out and decided to head back. I walked back on the trail to my apartment. The whole time, I was looking over my shoulder every so often to see if the lights would return. They never did, and I went back home and then went to bed a short time later. I was confused about it, but overall forgot it pretty quickly. However, a few nights later, I went for a walk again pretty late. It was around the same time as before. I'm not sure if it was the same spot again, but overall, I remember seeing police lights off the trail in the woods again. This was really weird. I was very curious as to what these were. I thought that maybe they were some kind of security lights. I was sure that there was some logical explanation, but I was just curious as to what it was. So when I got closer, once more, I went off the path. Not long into this, the lights all turned off again. It was like the same thing as before. I thought that it was really weird how they turned off as soon as I got into the woods, but I kept going this time. I didn't really hear anything, and I didn't say anything this time. I walked for about 2 or 3 minutes off the trail going to where I had seen the lights. It was pretty thick woods, but soon I reached a little clearing. I was sure that this is where the lights had been. I looked around and didn't see or hear anything strange at all. As I was looking around, I started to feel really creeped out. I asked if anybody was there, and I got no response. Then, as I was still in the clearing, I heard somebody moving in the woods behind me. It sounded like someone walking in the woods. They were farther in the woods and in the opposite direction of the path and were heading towards me. I happened to be facing the opposite way towards the trail. When I heard whoever was there approaching, I just took off. I bolted for the woods and ran back for the trail. I didn't look to see who was there, and I was not chased, but I didn't stop running until I made it back on the trail. Then I jogged all the way back to my apartment. It was really strange, and I was super creeped out. The next day, I saw that there was a sign at the entrance of the woods, blocking the whole trail, that said that the trail was closed and to keep out. I had no idea why or what was going on there. Somebody was in the woods in the middle of the night, though. After like a week, the trail opened again. I did go down it a few more times and walk through the woods, but never again at night. I was working at Target on Black Friday 2 years in a row. I worked at Target when I was a young woman, aged 19 to 21. This was a while ago now, and I recall that we opened at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I remember when I first heard that, I thought they were crazy. Nobody wants to work on Thanksgiving, and I didn't think that people wanted to go shopping on Thanksgiving either. They should be with their families. I remember that beforehand I said that, and my manager said that we would all spend time with our work family. I thought that was cheesy, but to be honest, it did end up being kind of fun working on Thanksgiving. Plus, I got paid time and a half. The first year went pretty smooth. We had tons of employees working, and I was at the checkouts most of the time as a cashier. The second year, I knew more of what to expect. I was working basically almost an overnight shift this time, from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. We stayed open all night, and 3 a.m. was a really weird time to get off, as I had only worked until midnight the previous year. I wondered how busy the store would be in those overnight hours, and spoiler alert, it was busy. Very busy. I remember all of us cashiers got to our check lanes before the store opened at 6 p.m. We were using every single lane, and I mean every one. From the time we opened at 6 o'clock, I saw the large crowd of people enter the store. Some of them were even running. Very quickly, people mostly went to the electronics department, and before long, there were customers entering all the checkout lines, including my own. I got busy ringing up customer after customer. It went by pretty fast just because of how busy we were. I remember that at one point, a sort of distinct-looking man came to my checkout. I don't remember what he got, but he had glasses, short dark hair, and was wearing a blue jacket. Things went normal, and I only remembered him because he checked out in my line again like an hour later. I was like, wait, didn't this guy check out in my line before? I didn't say anything though, and soon he was gone again. As I kept working, soon it got later and later. The store remained just as busy as people were literally everywhere. It was a steady flow of people through my checkout. Then, maybe 2 hours later, the man was in my line again. I remember he asked me how my night was going and what time I got off. I dismissed it as friendly chit-chat and answered him. I mentioned how I had seen him before, and he simply said something like, I have a lot of shopping to do. I was just like, oh, okay, but I didn't think until later how it didn't make much sense. Why not get all the stuff at once? And why was he always in my line, as there were literally almost 30 others to choose from? Soon though, I sort of forgot about it as I checked out other customers. Then it was time for my break. I went to the front of the store and through the employees-only doors towards the break room. There was a number of other people in there, including my best friend at work, another girl named Kayla, who was around my age. I sat next to her and talked with her about how her shift was going. Kayla was not a cashier, but worked in the sales floor mainly in soft lines. She told me that it was crazy out on the floor. Then she said that there was this creepy guy who she had reported. Apparently, a guy came up to her and started talking to her, asking her where stuff was. She helped him at first, but then he started asking her weird questions and wouldn't let her go away. He kept asking her stuff and sort of following her around. His questions got inappropriate, and she went over to a manager and reported the guy. She said that when she went to report him, he ran away, and was not sure if he had left the store or if he was still in there. It was hard to know because the store was literally packed, and Targets are also pretty large. I felt bad for Kayla to deal with such a creep. It reminded me of the man I kept seeing in the check lane. When I told her about him, we asked each other what the guy looked like, and we realized that it was the same guy. I now felt even more weirded out by this man. I hoped that I would not see him again, and that he would not go through my line anymore. Soon after, I went back out, as well as Kayla. I only had a few hours left, as did she. So I continued with checking out customers. About another hour later, I saw the man once more. He was in my line, but it wasn't his turn yet. I was at a different check lane now, but here he was, in my line once again. As soon as I saw him, our eyes locked for a moment. He must have sensed the different look on my face now that I knew he was a creep. I thought that the managers might be looking for him after he harassed Kayla. So I took out my walkie and I radioed in, "Can I get a GSTL to check lane 20? As soon as I said that, I saw the guy leave his place in line and start quickly walking away. By the time the manager got to me, the guy was long gone. I reported what happened, and the manager was trying to find the guy, but obviously had 100 other things to do as well. It was a crazy night with all the shoppers. There was shoplifting to worry about and just general tasks. And any other night, this guy would have been kicked out of the store already. My manager said that he would look for the guy and walked off in the direction that he went. I hoped that he would find him, but I didn't get my hopes up too much. I was just glad that he was out of my line, and I continued with my work. For the last few hours of my shift, I didn't see the guy. The store stayed very busy into the wee hours of the morning. At 3 a.m., the store was still packed, which was a crazy sight. I was finally done though, and I went up, clocked out, and then left. I started walking to my car at the back end of the parking lot. As I was about halfway there, I noticed a car come up behind me driving the same way that I was walking. I moved over to let it pass. When I did, the car did not go past me as I had expected, so I turned around and looked at it. When I did, my jaw about dropped as I saw the same creepy man behind the wheel. It was this old beat-up car, and the guy was staring at me through those big glasses. I walked faster and hurried to get to my car. When I got there, I went inside and locked the doors and felt a little safer. But the man in his car drove up and parked in a spot like 2 spaces away from me. I realized then that he was probably waiting for me to leave. Then what would happen? Would he follow me? I figured that he probably would, so I decided not to leave just yet. We both sat in our cars for like 5 minutes. I was on my phone texting Kayla as well as the Target group chat. I told them about the creepy guy, but Kayla didn't respond right away because she was still working. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to go back in the store. I got out of my car and then quickly walked towards the entrance. The man did not get out of his car or follow me. He stayed there. I went inside Target, just walked around for a while, and talked to a few coworkers. Then I came across my coworker David, who was a cart attendant. He was helping a customer with a TV, and when he heard about the guy, he said that he would come out and see what his problem was. David was a big guy, and as a cart attendant, he worked out in the parking lot all the time. So after he finished helping a customer, he left the store with me. We both walked out to my car, and the man was still there waiting for me to leave. David made a beeline going straight for him. He walked right up to the guy's driver's window and knocked on it. I saw the man in the car look super uncomfortable. David was basically pounding on the guy's window, demanding he roll it down. I remember David was calling him a scumbag and stuff. He was like, "Hey scumbag, roll down your window, I gotta talk to you." When the insults started, the man went into action. The guy quickly put his car into drive and just sped away, quickly leaving the Target. I was glad that he was gone. David was like, "I don't know why he didn't want to talk to me." I thanked him for his help, and then I left and went home. I never saw that guy again, but it still creeps me out knowing that he might have followed me home. Earlier in the night, I had told him what time I was getting off that night and things like that. I hadn't known that the man was acting creepy towards Kayla and maybe even others. Overall, that was the craziest Black Friday that I worked at Target. This happened one time when I was working at Walmart years ago. I don't work there anymore, and I only worked there for about a year. I mostly worked in the parking lot pushing carts, but I also stocked shelves at times occasionally as well. When I worked there, I got to know a decent amount of the other coworkers. I was pretty friendly and had some work friends there, which was nice to have. Some of the workers were good, and others not so much. But one in particular was super lazy. I think anyone who's ever had a job can relate to having a coworker like this. There was a guy named Austin, and he was always slacking off. He would literally clock in and then go straight to the back room and just hide and go on his phone for 8 hours. He would only be seen again if he was specifically called to do a task or if it was time to clock out. He would actually do work like 1 in every 5 shifts. It made me so mad, but I wasn't going to report him or anything because I'm not a rat. And at Walmart's they have so many employees that it's possible for some of the employees to go unnoticed for hours, at least at some locations. It really depends on the management and how the store is ran there, I guess. And it was weird because my managers there were actually kind of strict, but for whatever reason they either didn't catch on to Austin or just didn't care. Anyways, one day I saw that Austin was working with me and I rolled my eyes. That meant more work for me. I saw him clocking in and then didn't see him for like 3 hours, which was expected. After that, I continued with my work. A while later though, I had to go to the back room of the store to get something. When I was back there, I was walking through a really quiet area. In the back room, it's pretty much how you would expect. There's lots of crates and boxes and products yet to hit the floor. There's also forklifts and other equipment as well as a few other rooms. There was one spot in particular where it kind of went around a corner. As I was back there, I saw around the corner part a person sitting down. I could only see part of their arm and realized that it was Austin. I ignored him and kept going. I thought about maybe saying something, but I didn't think it was worth it, so I just kept working. Like an hour later, I had to go back there again. I walked by the same spot and saw Austin still there. This time, I stopped and looked at him. I was just ticked off that he hadn't moved the whole hour. I wanted to call him out. But then, as I stood there, only seeing his arm, he got up. That's when I realized that it wasn't actually Austin. It was some random guy. He did not work at the Walmart and was not supposed to be back there. He looked at me for like a second, and then walked farther around the corner quickly and out of my sight. After seeing that, I just walked away. I didn't feel like telling some guy that he couldn't be back there and had to leave the store. I was more so just glad that it wasn't Austin slacking off, so I left the area and went back to work again. I continued working for the next few hours. Now I had to work past closing time that night, so I would get off shortly after the store would close. I remember that when I was finally about off, the store was closed, and I saw Austin come to the front and clock out a few minutes early. On the other hand, I was going to actually finish my work. I was walking in the back room again and saw the same man once more. This was crazy this time, because it was hours after the previous time that I had seen him. I had no idea that he was still back there, and I didn't think that he would be. This time when I saw him though, he was not in the same place. He was not really hiding, but far away almost at the end of the sort of long hallway that we were in the back room area. Nobody else was around at all. I was going to kind of just ignore the man once again. I would tell someone else that he was back there once I left. But as I stood still back there, I saw the guy start to walk in my direction, and he was walking pretty fast too. I didn't know why, but he didn't say anything. Soon he started running and was going straight for me. The only thing that I could think to do was to turn around and run away. So I went to the opposite direction until I made it back to the door that went into the main store area. When I got back out, I quickly ran to find the nearest coworker. The man did not emerge from the back. I told my coworkers what was going on. When the word got around to one of the store managers, the cops got called. I was done with work, so I left. But I found out later on that the cops arrested the guy. He had been in the back for hours, and he got in through a back door which was left open. Those doors were never supposed to be left open. It is my theory that Austin left the door open. He was probably hiding in the back at the other end of the store. I worked there for another few months before quitting. Austin quit before I did though. I remember him writing in our group chat that he was happy to announce that he was getting a job at our rival Target out of spite. He went on to say a bunch of bad things about our store and management. He's one to talk because he literally got away with being the laziest worker of all time. And when he quit, he didn't even put in his 2 weeks notice. He just stopped showing up. But that was my craziest experience working at Walmart. I went to Walmart one night many years ago. This was back when Walmarts used to be open 24 hours. It was always interesting to go to Walmart in the middle of the night. The store would usually be very quiet. Sometimes you would see the employees stocking the shelves. Other times you would see some of the craziest customers. And other times it would be very quiet and peaceful. I've always been a night owl, and I often used to work late as well. On this night I had worked sort of late, but I went back to my apartment after work and then decided to go out shopping to the nearby Walmart. It was like a 5-minute drive from my apartment, and I left to go there probably a little after midnight. But when I needed to do a little shopping, I enjoyed going so late. There would be no traffic on the roads and hardly any traffic in the store as well. So I remember that when I got to the Walmart, I parked kind of in the far back of the parking lot. I walked inside the store and started shopping. I didn't need to get that much stuff, and I think I just had a shopping basket and not a cart. Mostly, I was in the grocery department of the store getting food that I needed. When I was inside the store, I saw only a few other people. Most of them were employees, and I saw a couple of other people that were shopping, but not very many. After being in the store for maybe 10 minutes, I remembered that I heard my cell phone start to ring. I was confused as to why somebody would be calling me so late at night. I took it out of my pocket and answered. When I did, I said hello, but heard nothing on the other end. Then I heard someone breathing. Multiple times I asked who was there, but no one said anything. So at that point, I hung up, thinking that it was probably a wrong number or somebody called me by mistake. I looked at the number, and it was not one that I recognized at all. I was a little creeped out from hearing the breathing, but nobody speaking at all, but I just carried on with my shopping. But then, surprisingly, like 5 minutes later, that same number called me again. I answered once more and said hello. There was once again silence. I asked who was there, but heard nothing. Then they hung up on me. I was even more confused and also creeped out now. I continued my shopping and finished up. Then I went to the front of the store and checked out. When I did not receive any more calls. After checking out, I walked to the exit doors and stepped out into the parking lot. When I did, I could see my car parked a long ways away. I remember that it was a cool and sort of foggy night. When I saw my car, though, I noticed that there was a man standing next to it. He was literally leaning on my car, but facing in the opposite direction, and there were no other cars parked directly around mine, so I didn't know why he was there. The man was wearing dark pants and a hooded sweatshirt, so I couldn't make out any details about him at all. I couldn't see any part of his face with him standing in the opposite direction. I had started to walk to my car, but now stopped just about 20 feet into the parking lot. It seemed really creepy. Then I suddenly heard my phone start to ring in my pocket again. I took it out and looked. It was the same person calling. I answered it again and this time said, "Why do you keep calling me?" There was still no answer. However, I looked at the man that was standing next to my car in the parking lot. I saw that he was now holding a cell phone up to his ear. Was this the guy who was calling me? I asked him, "Are you standing next to my car right now?" When I said this, he did not answer but hung up on me. Then I saw the guy standing by my car put the cell phone back in his pocket. The man then started to turn around and face me. When he did, I saw that he was wearing sunglasses, but I really couldn't make out any other details. He was far away and it was dark out. I was so creeped out that I turned around and walked back inside the Walmart. I just started walking around the store, hoping that when I went back out, the man would be gone. A short time later, the guy called again. I declined the call and then shut my phone off completely. I started wandering the aisles of Walmart aimlessly, just wondering to myself who that guy was and what was going on. After walking around for like 15 minutes, I was somewhere in the back part of the Walmart near the auto parts area. I came around a random aisle and saw the man now inside the Walmart. He was kind of far away and walking down another aisle. He was still wearing the hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. I quickly turned the corner of another aisle and was out of sight of the guy. Then I walked to another aisle as fast as I could and started quickly making my way to the front. A short time into that and I just started running. I didn't look back and sprinted to the exit doors. When I got there, I ran out into the parking lot and went for my car. I made it there, got inside, and looked around. I saw the creepy guy just walking out of the Walmart and into the parking lot. Then I quickly drove away. I got home and wasn't followed or anything. I never saw that guy again. I turned my phone back on and saw that he had tried to call multiple times. I blocked his number. But I still have many unanswered questions. How did he get my number and who was he? Had he been following me or stalking me somehow? The whole thing was very strange, but I'm happy that I never saw him again after that. For a little background, when I was a young woman about 10 years ago, I worked at a Walmart for a few months. I worked as a cashier and was just 20 years old, working during the summer when I was back home from college. The Walmart was not far from where I lived, and they were always hiring with it being a large store and whatnot. So after getting the job, things went well for a while. Then, one time, this man came to my checkout. He looked young, but probably a few years older than me. Overall, I would not say that he was ugly, but I will say that he was not very attractive. When he was at my checkout, I was scanning his items that he was buying, and he told me that I was beautiful. I was happy to get a compliment and told him thanks. He then asked me what my Instagram was. I don't know why, but for some reason, I gave it to him. Looking back, I could have just said that I didn't have one or that I didn't want to give it out. But I told him it, and he took out his phone right then and there, which I didn't expect. He typed it in, found my profile, and then followed me and showed me that he did. It seemed a little bit strange, but I just played it off and said thanks. He then asked me if I had a boyfriend. I told him no, but I'm not really looking for anything at all right now. He said that he understood, and I felt a little better. There was an awkward silence, and I quickly finished scanning his items. I saw him looking at his phone, and I realized that he was on my Instagram page still. Quickly enough, though, he paid, and I told him to have a nice day. When he left, he said bye, and I thought that I would not see him again. But I was wrong. Literally the next day, the guy sent me a message on Instagram. He said hi, and I did respond to him saying hi back. He started a conversation with me, and I didn't know what to think about it. Pretty quickly, though, he asked to hang out, and I said no. He continued to message me, so I just ignored him. To that point, he had not done anything that creepy yet. I'm not going to make a guy seem like a creep just for shooting his shot with me. But after that is when things got real bad. He started messaging me almost non-stop. When I stopped replying, he just continued sending me messages. I was so tired of seeing the notifications. In 2 days, he sent me over 30 messages. Most of them were just saying stuff like, hey, or why aren't you responding? Finally, I sent him one final message, saying that I was sorry but I didn't want to hang out or talk with him anymore, and to please leave me alone. He did not, though. He just kept sending me even more messages. so at that point I blocked him. But this didn't stop the young man. He made another fake Instagram account and started messaging me there. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was the same guy, so I blocked that account as well. He didn't message me after that. But a few days later, I got word from some of my friends that he was messaging them on Instagram. Apparently, he saw who some of my friends were through my Instagram page, so he followed a few of them and then started asking them questions about me. He claimed that he was a good friend of mine, and so a few of them contacted me about it because he seemed strange. I was angry and told my friends to block him and that he wouldn't leave me alone. After this, I thought the whole ordeal was finally over. Except, one night during the next week, I was working another shift at Walmart. As I was at my checkout, I was kept pretty busy for most of the time. But at one point, when things quieted down, I looked around and observed the same man there. He was sitting down on a bench closer to the exit doors. He was just sitting there and watching me. When I noticed him, he didn't wave or anything. He just stared intently. It was really creepy, and I looked away at once. I tried to distract myself, and soon enough, some more customers came into my check lane. But when I looked back and he was still there, I had enough. I left my check lane and found my boss, who I told about the whole situation. He said that he would go talk to the guy. Now, I don't know what my boss was planning to say or do. I'm not sure if he had the authority to kick the guy out of the store or anything. I guess he did if he was a manager, but as soon as my boss walked over and approached the man, the guy quickly got up and left. They didn't even have a conversation. I was glad to see him gone and hoped that he would not come back. I worked the rest of my shift and it went well. I got off sometime that night at maybe 9 or 10 o'clock. However, after clocking out, I left the store and started walking through the parking lot to my car. It was very quiet now. I saw one guy kind of walking around the lot. I realized it was the same guy. He was not standing by my car, but I hoped that he wouldn't notice me. I turned and started walking to another row of cars closer to mine. But then he did notice me. I saw him start walking in my direction. I bolted for my car and ran there. I was able to make it, but the guy reached the car right after I did. I went inside and locked the doors, and he started knocking on my window. I didn't waste any time and just drove away. After that, I actually called my boss and told him about the guy to make him aware of the situation. Because if this were to continue, I would not feel safe coming to work anymore. Thankfully, I was off for a few days. When I returned to work, I was told that the guy was banned from the Walmart. Apparently, he showed up again, I guess to look for me, but he didn't buy anything and just walked around. Based on him following me to my car, the manager trespassed him from the store. I think that was enough for him to finally leave me alone once and for all, because I never saw him again after that. I only worked at the Walmart for about another month though. Looking back, it was a pretty creepy experience.
Jason and I were setting up camp at a lookout spot along Lake Ridge Road in northern Montana on New Year's Eve. We'd driven 3 hours into the mountain to get away from the hospital. Both of us worked in emergency medicine, and it was our tradition to trade crowds and noise for silence and stars before we started a fresh year. The forecast said light snow. The road was mostly clear when we started that afternoon, but by the time we reached the turnout around dusk, the storm was getting worse. The sky looked so heavy, one could barely see 50 feet. We probably should have turned back, but we were already there. We'd just gotten out to stretch when I saw someone coming from the trees. At first, I thought maybe a hiker or ranger was checking on people before the storm got worse. But as he got closer, I saw he was limping badly, clutching his left arm. His face was in twisted pain. He collapsed to one knee in the snow about 20 feet from us and started yelling that his wife had fallen off a ridge, was hurt badly, and maybe bleeding out. He begged us to come help. Jason and I didn't even hesitate. Years of training kicked in as Jace grabbed our trauma kit from the trunk while I got blankets and headlamps. In the rush, we forgot to grab our phones. The man kept saying his wife was dying, that it was close, and that we must hurry. We followed him into a narrow trail, cutting between thick pines. The snow muffled everything except our breathing and boots. We walked about 5 minutes, heading deeper into the woods. That's when I started noticing how the man's limp was changing. It had been dramatic when he first approached us, but now it was barely there.
and the usual panic and urgency of a person whose wife was almost dying was very obviously missing. Instead, he was just walking and glancing back occasionally to make sure we were following. I whispered to Jace that something felt off. He nodded, but kept moving. If there really was someone injured, we couldn't risk not helping. But just as we took a steep turn towards the denser side, two men stepped out from behind a large boulder. They were dressed in heavy furs and had their faces covered. One had a rifle slung over his shoulder. The other was holding a metal pipe with a flashlight duct taped to it. The limping man dropped the act immediately. He straightened up and shook out his arm like he'd been holding it stiff for too long as he stepped back toward the other two. My stomach dropped. Jace went rigid beside me. The man with the rifle told us to hand over everything we were carrying. His voice was flat, almost bored, like he'd done this before. Jace quietly handed over his wallet, his watch, and the chain he was wearing. I handed over my possessions too. They asked for our phones. We told them we'd forgotten them in our car. They asked Jace to pass the keys over. Jace slowly opened his palm, but right before the guy with the rifle could snatch it, Jace fumbled and dropped them into the snow. Sensing his plan, I took tiny steps back and waited. Just as the man bent down to pick them up, Jace elbowed him in the ribs and yelled at me to run as he himself took off in the opposite direction. I bolted. Behind me, gunshots cracked. Something hit the snow to my left, but I didn't stop. I kept running and slipping. The branches whipped my face, and cold burned in my lungs. I heard them behind me, but the storm was getting worse, and the visibility was dropping. I didn't know where I was going, just downhill toward where the road might be. My legs were burning. My hands were numb. I'd lost a glove and couldn't feel my fingers. I kept running and thinking about Jace, whether he'd made it or they'd gone after him instead. Then, through the trees, I saw the yellow lights. A snowplow was grinding up the main road. I crashed out of the woods onto the shoulder, waving both arms, and screamed. The driver hit the brakes hard. He pulled me into the cab and asked what happened. I tried to explain, but my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely talk. He called it in and drove me to where the rescue teams could meet us. I sat in the back of an ambulance for what felt like hours. I couldn't stop shaking and kept asking about Jace. Nobody knew anything. They wrapped me in blankets and checked me for frostbite. My fingers were turning white at the tips. They found Jace about 2 hours later. He'd managed to circle back toward the road on his own, bruised and shaken, but alive. He said he'd lost them in the thicker part of the woods and heard them searching for a while before they finally gave up. When I saw him walking toward me, I started crying. By the time the police got to the turnout, our car was gone. The snow had filled every footprint and tire track. The officers said they'd notified nearby stations, but I saw it in their faces. They weren't going to find those men, or our vehicle. A ranger told me a few weeks later that there had been other disappearances along that ridge. But the cases went nowhere because the Montana wilderness in winter is huge, and it's easy to vanish if you know how. I kept thinking about what would have happened if only one of us had gone to help. I'm 29 now. That was 3 years ago. I still work in emergency medicine, but I don't go camping anymore. Don't drive mountain roads in winter. And when someone comes into the ER with an urgent story about a family member who needs help, I call security first. Riley and I were driving through the mountains of West Virginia on New Year's Eve, heading to my grandmother's cabin, farther up that ridge. She lived alone up there, and we promised to spend the holiday with her. The forecast called for light flurries, but anyone who's driven the mountain roads knows the weather does what it wants when you get into the higher elevation. We left around 8 that evening. By 11, we were deep into the mountains, where the trees pressed close to the road and houses disappeared completely. Snow was falling steadily, the kind that sticks to everything and makes the world go quiet. Riley had been working doubles all week and could barely keep her eyes open. She asked if we could pull over so she could rest. I told her to climb in the back. She was out within seconds, curled up under her blanket. Riley slept like the dead. As I kept driving, the snow got heavier. turning into ice pellets that tapped against the windshield. My headlights could barely cut through the white ahead. Suddenly, the car jolted, like I'd rolled over something on the road. The dashboard lights flickered. The engine sputtered twice before it died, and everything went pitch dark. I groaned and tried the ignition, but it whined and died over and over. My phone showed 3% and barely 1 bar of signal. Outside, the road stretched empty in both directions. I squinted but couldn't see any shed visible anywhere. I got out into the freezing air and popped the hood, used my phone's flashlight and looked at the wiring, even though I didn't really know what I was looking for. The cold bit through my jacket immediately. The storm muffled everything. Even the trees seemed to lean in closer. I was contemplating waking up Riley when I saw the headlights approaching from behind. A dark SUV rolled to a stop about 20 feet back, and a man got out. He was big, maybe in his 40s, wearing a thick jacket and work gloves. He walked up with this casual, friendly expression, but something about him felt wrong. His eyes were too alert, like he'd been expecting to find someone out here. He asked if I was okay and said the road was a graveyard tonight. His voice was warm enough, but there was something weird about it. I explained that my car had just died. He came over and leaned in under the hood next to me and peered at the engine. He smelled like cigarettes and something sour. He said the battery was cooked and the engine was too far gone to fix. Said I'd freeze if I stayed, and suggested I come with him to the next town and figure the rest out once the storm passed. I thanked him and lied about already having a tow truck on the way. He insisted no tow truck would make it through and that it was getting colder. I turned back to the engine, trying to look busy, trying not to show how scared I was. I thought maybe he'd take a hint and go away. Instead, he stepped closer. His voice dropped lower, almost bored now, like he was tired of pretending. He said I was getting in his car whether I wanted to or not. Then he grabbed my arm. I jerked back and tried to yell, but he clamped his hand over my mouth and shoved me hard against the side of my car. My phone fell into the snow. I could feel his breath on my face. He was saying something about not making this difficult, about how far we were from anyone who could help. Somehow, I bit into his palm and screamed Riley's name before he clamped my mouth shut again. That's what woke Riley up. I heard the back door fly open, Riley shouting his name, confused and half asleep, but alert enough to know something was wrong. The man froze. His hand was still over my mouth, but he'd gone completely still. He hadn't known anyone else was in the car. Riley scrambled out, still tangled in the blanket, yelling louder now. The man let go of me like I'd burned him. He backed up, his eyes moving fast between Riley and me. I could see it on his face. 2 people meant witnesses. He wouldn't want to take the risk. He didn't say anything else, just turned and ran back to his SUV, got in, and peeled out into the icy road, his taillights disappearing into the snow within seconds. Riley helped me back to the car. My cheek was already swelling where he'd shoved me. My hands were shaking. Riley called 911. The police took nearly an hour to arrive. They searched the road with flashlights, but the snow had covered everything. I described everything I remembered about him and his car. One of the officers told me that this wasn't the first report like this on New Year's week. Said there had been others over the years. He said the man knew these roads, when to wait, and how to pick his targets. It took me a while to understand what had saved me. The man had thought I was alone. He watched me get out of my car by myself, watched me struggle with the hood. He assumed I was isolated, vulnerable, and easy. But Riley had been there the whole time, sleeping in the back seat. He hadn't seen her, hadn't known. And the moment he realized I wasn't alone, he ran. I survived because I had company. I'm 23 now. That was 2 years ago. I don't drive mountain roads at night anymore. Can't do it. Even with other people in the car, my hands start shaking the moment the sun goes down and the trees close in. Riley and I don't talk about it much. She feels guilty sometimes for not staying awake. I tell her that's stupid. She saved my life by being there. But sometimes, late at night, I think about him and all the other women on those roads. The ones who were actually alone and didn't make it to their grandmother's house. It was New Year's Eve, 2019. I was driving home from a late shift at the wildlife rehab center where I worked. My only company for the drive was Bax, my Australian Kelpie, who usually rode in the back seat pretty quietly. The route I took was County Road 314. It cut through miles of dormant almond orchards where most of the farm workers had gone home for winter. The night was unusually still, with no wind or traffic except for my headlights and the dark shapes of trees on either side. About halfway into the trip, Bax started whining. At first, I thought he just wanted attention, but he stood up and started pacing in the back seat. I realized he needed to pee. I found a break in the orchard rows, pulled over, and left the engine running with the headlights on. The air was cold and damp when I stepped out. I opened the back door, and Bax jumped out, sniffing around the edge of the trees. He didn't wander far until I heard a loud crash echoed from somewhere in the woods. It was heavy and deliberate, like someone moving through the trees. Before I could react, Bax bolted straight into the orchard and disappeared within seconds. I yelled his name over and over, but there was no sight of him. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and went after him. The beam barely cut through the darkness. I kept calling his name and kept moving deeper between the rows. I was moving through a narrow clearing when my foot suddenly dropped into nothing. I fell forward, hard, landing in a shallow pit about 2 feet deep. My phone flew out of my hand, and the flashlight beam spun wildly before landing face down in the dirt. The pit was maybe 4 feet across, worn smooth at the edges like vehicles had been driving over the spot repeatedly. I could feel the tire ruts carved into the packed earth. That's when I heard the voices, coming from somewhere close by. A blunt, wet thud through the trees, followed by a muffled groan. My blood went cold. I grabbed my phone and killed the flashlight. I scrambled out of the pit and crawled to the nearest tree, pressing myself flat against the trunk. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Bax appeared beside me with his body low and tail tucked. He was trembling. I'd never seen him like that before. A few rows away, the voices rose. They were business-like laborers at work. I heard shovels scraping dirt and plastic rustling. One of them said something that made my stomach drop. He told the others to bury the body carefully. I needed to leave, needed to get back to my car and drive away as fast as possible. When I reached down to grab Bax, my hand touched the ground and resulted in a snap. Suddenly, those men stopped talking. One of them whistled. Another answered from a different direction. They'd heard me. They know someone's in here watching them. I scooped Bax into my arms and started moving, fast but trying to stay quiet. I was trying not to snap branches anymore or breathe too loud. The footsteps behind me got louder. They were spreading out and moving through the orchard in a line. I broke into a run, dodging between trees and clutching Bax against my chest. When I reached the edge, I could see my car through the branches. The headlights were still glowing, but as I got closer, I spotted movement near the driver's door. A man was leaning against the hood, smoking. He'd been waiting for me. My keys were in my pocket. There was no way to get in without him seeing me. Behind me, the footsteps got closer. I was boxed in. I made a split-second decision. Instead of going for the car, I veered hard left and ran parallel to the road. The man by the car shouted something into the orchard, and the formation shifted. They were hurting me. I ran until my lungs screamed and until my legs felt like they'd give out. I spotted a small concrete irrigation hut half buried in the weeds. I ducked inside and pulled Bax down with me, pressing my hand over his muzzle to keep him quiet. Flashlight beams swept past the entrance. Boots crunched on gravel just outside. A radio crackled, and one of them said they'd lost visual. I stayed frozen and didn't move. Minutes stretched on forever, but eventually, it got quiet again. I waited another 20 minutes before I even tried to move. When I finally crept back toward the road, my car was still there, but the driver's side window was smashed, with glass everywhere. They even shattered my headlights. I got in with shaky hands, started the car, and drove without headlights on down the dark road. It was risky, but at least I was away from those men. I drove 5 miles before I stopped to check Bax again. He was shaking in terror. I got home around 1 a.m. My dad was still up, waiting. He asked why I was so late, and I told him traffic had been bad. He looked at me like he knew I was lying, but he didn't push it. A few days later, I mentioned what happened that night to someone I trusted in the sheriff's department, off the record. They told me that area was a known route for things being done. I was better off not knowing. They said reporting anything publicly would put me and my dad at risk, and advised to forget I was ever on County Road 314 that night. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. How could I, when I knew I came seconds close to disappearing, dead, or worse, because I stopped at the wrong place at the wrong time?